The Primarch Reborn demands the impossible.
They await your presence, my lord.
He commands us to reconquer the 500 worlds of Ultramar. In the 10,000 years between his death and rebirth, how many worlds have been scoured by the archenemy? Devoured by the monsters of the hive mind? Sacrificed on the altar of Exterminatus? He is a demigod out of time, fighting for a golden age that can never dawn again.
Welcome home. Rise, Demetrian Titus, Master of the Watch, Captain of the Second Company, Warden of Ultramar!
The Primarch Reborn demands the impossible. But only in death does duty end.
Welcome, gentle listener, I am Baldmort, your faithful servant. I'll keep this intro brief. This will be a full reading of the expansion, The 500 Worlds, Titus. Images are not synchronized with the tale, as I have no editor and concentrate on the text and delivery. This is a hobby or relaxation prop only. Let us be about it. Games Workshop, Warhammer 40,000, 500 Worlds, Titus. It is a time of war. It is an age of dread. Horrors assail the Emperor's realm as the alien, the mutant, and the heretic seek to end humanity's dominion of the stars. Defeat follows defeat. The light of hope gutters. Yet there are those who stand indomitable against the gathering dark, who refuse to accept mankind's doom. Roboute Guilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines, Lord Commander of the Imperium, is such a champion. Guilliman's aim is to raise the banners of Ultramar high. He seeks to stoke the flame of humanity's collective spirit and see it blaze anew, to show that if victory and reconquest are still possible in Ultramar, then they are still possible everywhere. Sworn to this vision, his Ultramarines and their allies march out to reclaim the 500 worlds. Across the stars, the hosts of Ultramar advance as their Primarch's plan dictates. On the Connor, Protoss, and Among and Vespator fronts, new and bloody wars multiply by the hour. Alien hordes and heretic warlords flock to join the battles while, from within, traitors seek to bring the Reconquest to ruin. Guilliman would see the 500 worlds rise in glory. He would have Ultramar become humanity's mightiest bastion, and the foundation of something greater still. Yet his detractors think he has reached too far. His hopes already a dying dream. Only the God Emperor can know for sure, and his silence, some say, is damning. The Ultramarine Reclamation. Roboute Guilliman lived through the tumultuous events of the Horus Heresy. He remembers many things long forgotten by humanity at large, or else forcibly deleted from Imperial annals. The Primarch keeps most of these revelations locked away within his capacious memory, knowing that, at best, they would not be believed. At worst, some of the things Guilliman knows might trigger a new age of darkness that the ailing Imperium could not survive. Yet there are those ideas and principles the Primarch still treasures from that long-ago era which, to him, passed but a handful of years ago. His Codex Astartes is one such touchstone, and the ideal of a galaxy-wide crusade to restore order is another. But perhaps dearest to Guilliman's heart is Ultramar, his stellar realm, the empire within an empire that has proven the foundation of the Ultramarine strength for 10,000 years. However, even Ultramar is a shadow of what it once was. In its heyday, it was known across the nascent Imperium as the 500 Worlds. This was less a literal accounting than a recognition of the sheer enormity of the Ultramarines' realm. It was a domain fit to sustain the most numerous and prolific of all the Space Marine legions of old, a fastness for humanity's glorious potential. Perhaps it may yet be so again. Stagnation, entropy, despair. These are the blights that will bring Ultramar to its knees. They are the weeds that will choke our fields, the vermin that will gnawed on our corpses and sport amidst the ruins of our worlds. They are the mourners that will bind us in our shrouds and smother us to death. All this and worse they will do if we do not act. We will do this correctly. We will apply the full rigor and codification of our experience and wisdom to the task at hand. We will neither underestimate our many foes, nor waste the worthy strengths at our command. We will comprehend the true nature of the duty we undertake and the oaths we swear. Appreciate all that we risk and look unflinchingly upon the consequences of failure. But for all this, my sons, we will act. We must. Though we were victorious in the Plague Wars, still Mortarion and his repulsive Get wounded Ultramar deeply. Those worlds fester still. Loerbos, Parmenio, Lax. Worlds once vital to our realm, now saturated with the poisons of the warp. We have lost agri-worlds, hive worlds, centers of industrial production and strategic governance, and we are weaker for it. As we suffer, so too does my father's Imperium suffer. Our travails are a microcosm of humanity's greater torment. The situation cannot be permitted to deteriorate any further. Out there across the Emperor's realm or here in Ultramar, for to allow this would be to allow final and calamitous defeat. Theory and pragmatism alone cannot sustain us as we reclaim the 500 worlds. Instead, I urge you, my sons, look to vengeance, to honor, to righteous fury. How dare aliens make their festering lairs upon worlds that used to be ours? How long should we permit betrayers to mock us with every breath they draw, unpunished for their insults against us? I say to you, no longer! We are the Ultramarines, first amongst equals, the Emperor's finest. It is time we reminded our enemies and our allies of this truth. The armies of Ultramar will mobilize in full. Every asset will be activated, every resource committed to this endeavor. Even as I lead the fleets of the Indomitus Crusade to drive the foe from the wider Imperium Sanctus, so will you, my sons, drive them from the borders of our realm. Nor will you stop there. Ultramar was once a far greater realm than this, and it shall be so again. The 500 worlds shall be restored. I have planned this campaign in detail, built in every viable contingent, provided practicals for every theoretical. It will not be easy. It is undeniably a gamble, for all that it is a necessary one, I entrust it to you, safe in the knowledge that you, of all the Emperor's loyal servants, have the wisdom, fortitude, and strength of spirit needed to make my vision a reality, no matter the odds. Reclaim our realm of old. Let Ultramar stand tall, a bastion about which all the Imperium might rally. Do this for me, my sons, with courage and honor. Primarch Roboute Guilliman. Preface to the Consilius Imperatus Ultimar, being the detailed and exhaustive plan for the reconquest of the 500 worlds. The 500 worlds. Roboute Guilliman's plan for reclaiming the 500 worlds requires the conquest of many sectors and hundreds of planets. Some of these galactic reaches are already in Imperial hands, yet still considerable negotiation may be required to convince planetary rulers that the act of joining Greater Ultramar is not synonymous with abandoning their oaths to the wider Imperium. Other world systems or entire subsectors are lawless void wilds or held in the iron grip of alien or heretic warlords. While commandeering these regions is a more morally straightforward exercise, immense martial strength and stockpiles of material are needed simply to claim them, let alone consolidating control over and garrisoning them after the war fronts move on. In short, for almost anyone else, even conceiving a viable plan for the conquest of Greater Ultramar would have been impossible, bordering upon farcical. It is a testament to Lord Guilliman's sagacity that his plan could conceivably succeed, if, that is, he can trust lesser minds and wills than his own in its execution, and all the warriors who fight beneath the banners of Ultramar prove themselves worthy of his task. The name 500 Worlds should not be taken literally. It is better viewed as a link to Primarch Guilliman's past glories, and a statement of intent writ large in nomenclature of the most bombastic and inspiring sort. The Primarch's plan of conquest first pushes Ultramarine territory out upon the 4 tetrarchal fronts and promises seizing enough valuable worlds to address much of the damage left in the wake of the Plague Wars. Later stages see Ultramarine armies march on into far and darker reaches until eventually, should all go as planned, the Primarch's realm might well number more than 500 worlds. Scions of Ultramar. The Ultramarines are lauded by many within the Imperium as exemplars of all it means to be Space Marines. They are the gene sons of Roboute Guilliman, the Primarch who authored the Codex Astartes, and so codified the organizational and strategic tenets of the chapters. The Ultramarines cleave to these principles still, applying them to every war they wage while striving to live up to both the example of their gene-sire and their own reputation for excellence. Macragge is the home world of the Ultramarines, and the realm of Ultramar is in effect their private stellar empire. Yet their chapter alone could never hold or expand its boundaries. Indeed, the Adeptus Astartes are generally ill-suited to garrison duties or the wholesale capture of worlds. They are shock troops whose remit is to strike with overwhelming force, then depart for their next mission. More numerous forces, like the Astra Militarum and Navis Imperialis, are left in their wake to defend newly claimed territory. Moreover, Space Marine chapters are expected to send their strike forces far and wide across the Imperium in response to threats. The Ultramarines are no exception to this. Thus, when operating within their stellar empire, they rely heavily upon the human conscripts of the Ultramar Defense Auxilia regiments and the Ultramar Defense Fleet to protect their worlds and patrol their space lanes. With the Imperium torn in half by the Cicatrix Maledictum, and the pressure upon the Ultramarines increased still further, this has only become more pronounced. Some of the chapter's strike forces are lost beyond the Great Rift, their fates unknown. Others fight amongst the Indomitus Crusade, or in scattered war zones throughout the Imperium Sanctus. though as much of the Ultramarine strength as could be mustered battled for their realm during the Plague Wars, many of the warriors who survived that conflict were called away almost immediately to fight in war-zone Bastion against the swarms of High Fleet Leviathan. Stretched thin, the Ultramarines have been compelled to rely more than ever on their auxiliaries, aid from the wider Imperium, and the support of 9 other SHIELD chapters, appointed by Guilliman to help defend and expand Ultramar. Lords of the Realm. During the Great Crusade, Ultramar was divided into 4 tetra, each comprising multiple systems and ruled from a planetary seat of power by a tetrarch answerable to Guilliman. Though this system fell out of use during the intervening millennia, the Primarch restored the tetrarchy upon his return. The 4 tetrarchal worlds are Connor, Andamung, Protoss, and Vespator, while their respective tetrarchs are Captains Agiman and Felix of the Ultramarines, Captain Porton of the Genesis chapter, and Captain Balthus of the Doom Eagles. The 4 tetrarchs and the powerful administrative bodies serving them are ultimately responsible for the expansion of Ultramar. It is at their direction that the varied naval and ground forces of Ultramar fight to reclaim new worlds and defend those already arrayed beneath the Ultramarines' banners. Some of the Ultramarines' more storied champions helped to oversee the reclamation, having either remained in Ultramar after the Plague Wars or returned there upon the orders of Marneus Calgar. First Captain and Tetrarch Severus Agamon and the recently promoted Captain Demetrian Titus of the Second Company are amongst the latter. Both fought with distinction amidst the horrors of Warzone Bastion, with Titus accepting his captaincy with humility after Severus Akaran fell in battle. The Ultramarines had suffered heavy casualties defending the Bastion subsector from Tyrannids, and both the First and Second Companies required reinforcement. Moreover, Agamon's responsibilities as Tetrarch could no longer be set aside, nor could Captain Titus's new duties. More than just a bringer of death, Titus had now inherited the title of Master of the Watch. As such, he was charged with the sanctity of Ultramar's borders, which had become overstretched as reclamation efforts continued. Thus, while Marneus Calgar took a longer and bloodier route back to Ultramar, the captains raced ahead. They joined Captain Fabian of the 3rd and Ventress of the 4th, Aorus of the 6th and Talos of the 10th, in their efforts to coordinate the Ultramarine forces already fighting and hasten recruitment of the new aspirants who would bolster their strength. Some of the greatest names of the Ultramarines were absent from the fight. Captain Sicarius served alongside the Primarch in the Indomitus Crusade. Captain Helios was missing beyond the Great Rift, while the ferocious chaplain Cassius battled yet another splinter fleet beyond Ultramar's eastern fringe. Yet those of the Ultramarines who were present only fought all the harder in their fellows' absence, determined not to fail their distant comrades. Akaran's Fall, the Battle of Trig. It was on the hive world of Trig that Captain Sevastus Akaran of the Ultramarine Second Company met his end. The world was a vital bastion of the Pyre Mode system, and appeared a loyal imperial stronghold whose governor was singly dedicated to resisting the menace of the Tyrannids. Yet Munitorium adepts sent to Trig to help with martial logistics vanished without trace, along with their assigned company of Mordian Iron Guard and the Imperial Navy frigate that had borne them to their destination. Their disappearance might have gone unmarked for some time, but for a desperate and fragmentary astropathic scream that escaped the frigate before its destruction. Captain Akaran led a strike force of Ultramarines to investigate the sinister disappearances, accompanied by brother Charon, who had earned the honor of serving as Akaran's lieutenant. The Ultramarines soon uncovered an insidious gene-stealer cult that had spread up from the undersumps to the very spires of Trig's capital hive. Frantically devoted to their alien deities, the governor and his sycophants roused thousands of xeno-cultists embedded through every level of the city's society to swarm the Ultramarines and begin a planetary uprising, Acting swiftly, Captain Akaran sealed Trigg's capital by triggering its anti-atomic lockdown protocols, then took the fight to the seemingly endless tide of mutant heretics who sought his destruction. It was a decision that saw Akaran, Charon, and all their brothers slain, dragged down and torn apart one by one during increasingly desperate battles. Yet, with their lives, they bought Trigg's survival, keeping the hive sealed and the cult bottled up until massed Imperial reinforcements could arrive to purge the Xeno cult entirely. The Shield Chapters. Appointed by Guilliman, the Shield Chapters have been charged with the defense of Ultramar, no matter how far its borders extend. Alongside the Ultramarines themselves stand 9 of their successor chapters, bound to their resurrected gene-sire by blood and duty both. These chapters' homeworlds lie beyond the churning madness of the Great Rift, lost amidst the Imperium nihilus, vanished into uncertainty. As such, each has been afforded a base of operations within Ultramar, that they might better defend the Ultramarines' realm, until a time comes when, hopefully, they may set out to reclaim their own. The Ultramarines. Motivated by the tantalizing promise of mythical glories long lost, the Ultramarines strive harder than any to achieve the conquest of Greater Ultramar. Indeed, so fervent is their determination to honor the nigh impossible commands of their gene-sire, that some amongst the chapter risk sacrificing their famed nobility and precious connection to humanity upon the altar of merciless expediency. Ultramarines' battle cry: courage and honor. The Reborn. Created as part of the Ultima founding, the Reborn are dedicated to embodying the might and dutiful determination of their resurrected Primarch. This focus finds expression in a talent for armored warfare. The mechanized spearheads of the Reborn strike like the Primarch's blazing sword, while in defense, their dug-in tanks prove as indomitable as Guilliman's vaunted will. We are one with our engines, as he is one with his armor. In this unity lies our strength. Captain Cordo Uldaces. The size of the Emperor. All but destroyed when High Fleet Kraken overran their homeworld of Sotha, the size of the Emperor were fortified by an influx of Primaris recruits. Driven by a soul-deep hatred of the Tyrannids, the chapter's warriors now wage one bloody campaign after another to purge all aliens and any other threats from the eastern reaches of Greater Ultramar. Fortress Monastery, Orbital Station Aegida, reinstated. Location: geostationary orbit over Sotha. Planetary status: Perditum Infestus. Status: high battle readiness, deployments to reconquer Sotha, environs ongoing. The Silver Skulls. The Silver Skulls are disparaged by some amongst the defenders of Ultramar as superstitious, even barbaric. Certainly, the tribal cultures of their home world, Versavia, are brutal and have left their mark on the chapter's customs. They place great stock in the omen readings of their librarians, whilst their practices of hunting foes' heads as trophies, the finest of which they coat in silver, and tattooing their skin with honor and kill markings, are often viewed as scars. Yet none can doubt the chapter's savage effectiveness in both close assault and siege warfare. Dynamic and tremendously fierce when roused, the Silver Skulls are a fitting terror weapon to deploy against the enemies of Ultramar in this dark and bloody age. The Avenging Suns. The last chapter fashioned during the Ultima founding, the Avenging Suns epitomized the cold and terrifying anger of their Primarch towards the traitor and the heretic. Their original homeworld of Triaconis Major was destroyed during the Noctis Eterna, and all their battle brothers believed lost in battle. This new incarnation of the chapter has been gifted a new homeworld, Callimachus, within the 500 worlds. We are his vengeance. Avenging Suns battle cry. The Sons of Orar. Deriving their name from Captain Orar, The chapter believe him to have been an ancient hero of the Ultramarines and claim him as their spiritual patron. Though their combat doctrines are predominantly Codex compliant, the Sons of Aura place additional emphasis on stealth operations and sudden close-quarter strikes, meaning their battle brothers are especially adept at vanguard operations. The Nova Marines. As strict adherents of the Codex Astartes, the Nova Marines are an extremely efficient and effective fighting force, albeit somewhat hidebound. They are a fleet-based chapter, which has allowed them to spread their strength through the fluctuating bounds of Greater Ultramar, and fight reactively wherever emergent threats endanger the continual reclamation of the stellar realm. The existence of the alien is a problem with but one solution: extermination. Chapter Master Lucretius Corvo. The Praetors of Ultramar. Formed from the unnumbered sons, whose gene seed was derived from the Ultramarines, they have fought alongside battle brothers from many other chapters, and learned respect for their fellows' methods. Thus the Praetors of Ultramar undertake the sanctioned study of other chapters' strategies and tactics, seeking broader context by which to best understand and implement the teachings of the Codex Astartes. The Doom Eagles. With a somber and morbid culture, the Doom Eagles are entirely focused on the acceptance of inevitable death. Being Space Marines, however, their macabre mindset does not weaken their resolve, but rather hardens their minds and spirits. Utterly resigned to their eventual fate, they favour high-risk assaults and make extensive use of jump-pack-equipped warriors to bring inescapable death to the foe. Duty unto death! Doom Eagle's battle cry. The Aquiloan Brotherhood. While the Aquiloan Brotherhood adheres to the Codex Astartes, the chapter's battle brothers exhibit heightened zeal and detestation for what they perceive as deviant faiths, be it chaos worship, xenocults, or even misguided forms of veneration directed towards Guilliman himself. They display a delight in the use of flame weapons and heavy firepower against such practitioners that some amongst the Shield chapters find distasteful. Several brutal massacres have been attributed to this chapter since the Ultramarian reclamation began, blamed in part on the refusal to employ human envoys or diplomacy to convince the rulers of ostensibly loyal imperial worlds that they should pledge their fealty to Ultramar. Demetrian Titus, Captain of the Ultramarines Second Company. Demetrian Titus was captain of the Ultramarines Second Company more than 2 centuries ago. He lost his position due to the machinations of chaos worshippers on Greia and the extreme paranoia of an inquisitor. Titus's return to captaincy has been hard-earned, yet he remains the same warrior he has always been, and seeks to surround himself with good counsel. Titus's reunion with the Ultramarines and his return to their ranks came on the world of Kadaku, when their warriors discovered him fighting in the Death Watch. They wounded almost unto death during the fighting. Titus was recovered from the field of battle and endured the surgery required to save his life and become a Primaris Space Marine. Reinstated as a lieutenant, and with his Black Shield status redacted, Titus was instrumental in the Imperial victory over both Xenos and heretics in the Residia system. There were those amongst his chapter who still viewed the returned Titus askance, even after such spectacular deeds, but these detractors were firmly in the minority, especially as Titus now enjoyed the personal favour of Chapter Master Marneus Calgar. Thus bolstered in the eyes of his battle brothers, Titus next led a mission to Zarshuj, an apparently suicidal undertaking to destroy the stronghold of foul demon worshippers whose activities threatened an entire imperial world. Fighting there alongside his former mentor, Blade Guard Sergeant Metaurus, Titus defied death and the corrupting energies of the warp once more, thanks in large part to his unbreakable will and sheer determination to prevail. Barely had the lieutenant had a chance to return from the fighting on Zahuj when he was ordered to muster his forces under the command of Chapter Master Calgar in the Bastial sub-sector. There he and his battle brothers fought to defend Imperial worlds from Tyrannid swarms, protecting vital evacuation of personnel and data relics, and did battle with pernicious heretic forces seeking to take advantage of the mayhem caused by the Tyrannid invasion. Titus's forces drew upon hard-won battle experience to eliminate the Hive Tyrant coordinating the bio-siege of the Martyr's Palace on Ulandrian. They led the combat drop onto the ocean world of Hydra's lair that saw vital Prometheum rigs defended from an ocean-born Tyrannid swarm over 16 days of bloody battle. It was Titus, too, who delivered the final blade stroke to saw the head from the Norn emissary codenamed the Ghoul of Rushlav, and in so doing prevented the complete collapse of the Agri-World's defensive lines. It was thanks to these battle honours and a dozen more besides that, when Captain Akaran met his ultimate death, Demetrian Titus was, to most, the obvious choice to inherit his mantle of authority. New duties. Now a captain once more, Titus bears the heavy burden of upholding Akaran's legacy and discharging the additional duties that come with his rank. As per the teachings of the Codex Astartes, captaincy always brings with it further responsibilities, which are traditionally determined by which company the captain leads. Though these duties and their associated titles sometimes change dependent on the chapter's needs, it has long been the charge of the captain of the Ultramarine Second Company to serve as the master of the watch. To him falls the responsibility of defending the borders of Ultramar. He must see to it that a keen-eyed guard is maintained over not only Macragge itself, but also all of the other systems and worlds claimed as protectorates and recruitment worlds of the Ultramarines. Though he is tirelessly proactive as ever, these new responsibilities have compelled Captain Titus to temper his urge to storm into battle and win every fight by the most direct and personal methods. Should some broader threat escape his notice and wreak havoc in Ultramar, it would prove Titus derelict in his duties, no matter the personal glories he might win in the process. As such, the Stratagem is now Captain Titus's battlefield more often than not, while strike forces of his warriors and armoured assets must serve as his bolter and blade on a grand scale. With the reclamation of the 500 worlds now well underway, the galactic regions that Titus and his warriors must patrol grows by the day. Alien invaders, piratical opportunists, cult uprisings and malevolent supernatural manifestations threaten the overstretched borders of Ultramar and its supposedly secure heartlands alike. Despite this relentless proliferation of terror, somehow Titus's forces have so far proven equal to the many challenges, diplomatic, martial and spiritual, laid before them. It is thanks to their tireless vigilance that Captain Titus and his inner circle of advisors and counsellors have gained the moniker the Wardens of Ultramar. They have become something of a talisman to the hard-pressed people of the Stellar Realm. Of course, this only lays a greater weight of expectations and responsibility upon Titus's broad shoulders, for should his forces fail in their duty, the damage to Ultramarian morale would be considerable. Yet, of all the gene sons of Guilliman at large in the galaxy during the era Indomitus, it may be that none is better equipped to bear the endless burden of duty unending than Demetrian Titus. Weapons of warding. A compact but powerful fleet of warships is at Titus's command. It is a mixture of swift Ultramarines vessels and heavy brawlers drawn from the Ultramar Defense Fleet, with additional support from a squadron of Adeptus Mechanicus supply and repair craft. At its head sails the venerable strike cruiser Righteous Fury. It was aboard this vessel that the newly promoted Captain Titus returned to Ultramar, in company with Chief Librarian Tigurius himself. while Ticurius has since departed to other battlefronts within the greater Ultramarine war zone, the righteous Fury has remained with Titus and become his flagship. This is a great boon, for the strike cruiser is renowned for its fierce and indomitable machine spirit, and has undergone extensive modifications to expand its launch bays and enhance its plasma drives. The result is a unique strike craft capable of responding with lightning swiftness to developing threats, and rapidly deploying entire strike forces with prodigious air cover to ensure the destruction of whatever foe is encountered. Titus's fleet transports a sizable and comparatively elite army, whose singular duty is to stabilize each new breach in Ultramar's widening borders. Alongside the Ultramarines of the Second Company and their array of support armor and specialist assets, the Wardens of Ultramar also command a substantial strength of Ultramar Defense Auxiliary regiments, several of which are prestigious formations recruited upon Macragge itself. Taken in its entirety, Titus's host appears mighty indeed. The Master of the Watch has at his fingertips the power to shatter alien hordes, annihilate heretic enclaves, and even to burn entire worlds, should duty compel him. Yet the threats to the sanctity of Ultramar multiply relentlessly, and the warp churns, rendering even the shortest voyage perilous. In the face of such challenges, Captain Titus relies more than ever upon his hand-picked command cadre. Just as it is his duty to defend the borders of Greater Ultramar, so it is the task of the Wardens of Ultramar to help him do so. The Wardens of Ultramar. Ancient Gabriel. Gabriel is young to bear the colours of the Second Company, and remains impetuous and hungry for action. Having fought through the horrors of the Project Aurora incident, alongside the then Lieutenant Titus, Gabriel's loyalty to his commander was forged in the most desperate adversity, and consequently is all the stronger for it. His elevation to the rank of Ancient came at Titus's personal recommendation in the wake of the Second Company's defense of Hive Mordecai. During that battle, it was Gabriel's impassioned oratory and bloody-handed warrior example that kept the thin Astra Militarum defense lines from collapsing at the Mendicant Gate, despite all the Tyrannid hordes could throw at it. He has borne the honor standard of the Second Company since that day, and very obviously burns with pride and determination every time he hoists the colors high. There are some in the chapter who question the depth of Gabriel's experience and wisdom, yet Titus continues to value him for his plain-spoken counsel every bit as much as his martial might. Veteran Sergeant Metaurus. Amongst the oldest Ultramarines still surviving, Blade Guard Sergeant Metaurus is a veteran warrior and a wise choice of counsel. It was Metaurus who, centuries before the coming of the Great Rift, was responsible for the recruitment of a young Demetrian Titus upon the agri-world of Tarentus. He also oversaw Titus's training. The two share a bond still, Metaurus having nothing but weary scorn for the accusations against his former protege and those who have levelled them. Though his faith in Titus is absolute, and though he would give his life for his captain in a heartbeat, still Metaurus had his own reservations. He has known Demetrian Titus since the captain was just a blood-spattered youth, proven capable of whatever brutality was required to secure victory. Metaurus sees these depths of unyielding will in Titus still, magnified 1,000-fold by his transformation into one of the Adeptus Astartes, and honed by centuries of war. He sees, and he wonders, just what Captain Titus would be capable of in the name of seeing his duty done. Gaius Silver. As a Commodore in the Ultramar Defense Fleet, Gaius Silver commands entire formations of voyage ships in support of the Ultramarines. At times, he must also fight alongside or even take command of elements of Battlefleet Ultima. A highly capable naval commander, Silver has also been an expert in handling the tensions that flare when human crews must follow the uncompromising, sometimes merciless, edicts of the Adeptus Astartes. His calm is nothing short of glacial, even in the most desperate of situations, and he remains unfazed whether staring down the massed firepower of an enemy fleet or the volcanic wrath of a slighted Navis Imperialis admiral. Since his assignment to Captain Titus's fleet, Commodore Silver has taken as his flagship the Emperor-class battleship Magnificence Enthroned. From the richly appointed command bridge of this colossal weapon of war, Silver directs his fleet elements and coordinates his Ultramarine shipmasters, even while raining devastating bombardment down upon those who defy the will of Ultramar. Aemilia Minivers. The Ultramar Defense Auxilia, in whose ranks Aemilia Minivers serves as a respected legatus, are regiments of human soldiery raised within Ultramar to defend its worlds. Equipped and trained to a high standard, they are motivated by the fact that the battles they fight are to protect the realm they call home. The Defense Auxilia have a proud tradition of exceptional officers going back thousands of years that is upheld and embodied by Aemilia Minervas. Legatus Minervus commands the 30th Macragge Defense Auxilia, a prestigious regiment, and one of a number attached to Captain Titus's fleet. A stern and inspirational figure, Minervus has earned the respect of her soldiers and the Ultramarines alike. She can quote the Codex Astartes chapter and verse, and has built on substantial work done by her forebears in adapting its teachings and martial philosophies to the weapons and warriors of the Auxilia. These strategies and tactics Minervus knows by heart, and she is an expert in their decisive application during the heat of battle. Dianel Cornelius. Having served as an astropath within the fortress of Hera for over a century before joining Captain Titus's fleet, Adept Cornelius has proven his skill and fortitude beyond any doubt. The clarity of his sendings is second to none. At the same time, his determination to force missives through the worst empiric conditions matches the ironclad sense of duty exhibited by the Ultramarines themselves. For all his obvious worth, Adept Cornelius is not well liked. Already an abrasive personality, the horrors the astropath has faced and the constant nearness of horrible death in his calling have further instilled in him a sense of gallows humour as dark as the void. More than once Cornelius has been accused of unbecoming conduct and disrespect towards Ultramarines and high-ranking military officers alike. Captain Titus shields the astropath from the political fallouts of such incidents, for he sees Cornelius's attitude for the smokescreen that it is. Behind it lies a core of pure adamant and a devotion to the realm of Ultramar that matches Titus's own. Lucia Vesta. As a plenipotentiary of Ultramar, Vesta speaks with the authority of Lord Commander Roboute Guilliman. Moving ahead of the Ultramarine expansion, her task is to employ her exceptional talents as a negotiator to bring resistant worlds bloodlessly into Greater Ultramar. Her talents in this field have more than once spared the need for Titus's forces to enter battle at all. Though Vesta possesses a politician's cunning and a famously silver tongue, she can switch without warning to be as hard-nosed and merciless as any general when the situation demands. Her skill in the cut-and-thrust verbal battlefield of diplomacy has also trained Vesta to spot the slightest weakness in an opponent, and the merest hint of falsehood or dissembling during negotiations. It is for this reason that Captain Titus often includes Vesta amongst his war councils. Her unique perspective and keen eye for detail have proven invaluable on numerous occasions, and won the plenipotentiary great honor in the eyes of the Second Company. Give yourself to death. It is the fundamental entropic truth of the universe. Necrosaur Amentar. Necrosaur Amentar, the Triarch's punishment. The Necrons are unliving horrors from an elder eon. Their nobles, satisfied to know that they are feared as mythical nightmares, look down upon the galaxy's other species. Yet they are not without fears of their own. The Necron dynasties have their monster. Its name is Amentar. Amentar is a singularity amongst the Destroyer cults. It is said by some to have been the first to succumb to the badness and the first to spread it. Though what might have triggered it, no Necron knows. The Necrosaur is a vector of killing psychosis, a nexus of murder lust that overrides even deeply embedded protocols. Where Amentar goes, murderous insanity flares in the cortexes of other Necrons, spreading like a plague. From the lowliest serviles and soldiery to the most powerful of the nobility, and even the pseudo-omniscient master programs of the tomb complexes, all feel the pull of Amentar's dread madness to one degree or another. Those Necrons who do not immediately fall are often forcibly converted, in body and mind, into destroyers by cryptex already in thrall to Amentar's curse and utterly loyal to his cause. There are even Necrons who choose to align themselves with this agent of death out of fear, ambition, or guile. The name Amentar is known by every dynasty. To some, it stands as a signifier of unspeakable guilt and the most repugnant of betrayals. To others, it has become confused over the eons with supernatural corruption, with the breaking of the dynastic codes, and the threat of extinction. To a seemingly immortal species, such a threat might seem laughable. To those nobles who believe it mere legend, it is. But Amentar's existence is all too real. If the being known to the dynasties as Necrosaur Amentar ever had a true name or identity, it has long since been lost. Not even the tomb from which it must have woken is known. The extent of the information erasure suggests to many Necrons that it was intentionally expunged, and it is believed none but the Silent King ever possessed such powers. Even its title, Necrosaur, is unknown amongst the dynasties, alluded to only as being given to the holder by the Triarch themselves. Amentar itself does not know if it once had another identity, but such self-knowledge is a triviality long since subsumed by its murderous cause. Every element of Necrosaur Amentar's form has been tailored with the destruction of organic victims in mind. Over eons, it has had its slave cryptex amalgamate more and more lethal augmentations into its swelling form. Multiple bladed limbs bear scything edges of monomolecular destabilization, including forms many Necrons associate with servile constructs or the outcast flayed ones. Its very appearance represents horrific madness to repulsed dynastic nobles, a transgression of wrongness that would make their skin crawl if they had any. A serpentile tail grants it exceptional mobility, while emetic projectors tip its additional limbs. It is capable of tunneling through a world's surface like a worm through rotting fruit, and of slicing its way through subdimensions, exploiting every opportunity to reach its prey and efficiently exterminate them. Despite the unique depths to which Amentar's insanity delves, it retains a fierce intelligence, and undergoes periods of relative lucidity, both of which renders it more dangerous by far than any other destroyer. If Amentar were purely a creature of inordinate killing power, disturbed and unpredictable with the destruction of the living its sole concern, the Necron dynasties might ignore it. The Necrosaur, however, haunts Necrons' fears and stokes their disgust as no other being does, due to its abhorrent crusade. A murderous cause. Amentar is driven by more than a simple desire to destroy. Whether by an esoteric curse or engrammatic corruption, it has developed a quasi-religious obsession with the most feared of the Necron's former oppressors, the Nightbringer, as a god. By coercion or force, it seeks to gather the shards of the shattered star god and restore the object of its worship to unified coherence. This, Amentar believes, is surely the most efficient way to ensure that life is exterminated in every corner of the galaxy. To the Necrosaur, its vaunted ideal of the Nightbringer and to a lesser extent, even the C'tan's insane shards, represents a simplistic and starkly beautiful logic of death. It is a logic Amantar seeks to share with the galaxy. It is impossible to exaggerate the repugnance Necrons feel to Amantar's goal. The coherent C'tan of ancient history are the object of the species' loathing. Shattered through Necron power, the remaining shards are despised as vestigial slaves with no status. To exalt such broken things is a sin, only eclipsed by Amantar's drive to merge them again. Even if such a fate were possible, to think that the Nightbringer would be inclined to lead those who betrayed and enslaved it in a march of murderous conquest, instead of simply annihilating them all, is viewed as utter lunacy. Lunacy or not, the Necrosaur's armies grow with its every victory, and not all are fearful or enslaved followers, as a silent king would have the dynasties believe. Amantar's followers are so numerous that the Necrosaur cannot lead them all in person. Amongst its senior disciples are the generals of its Oblivion court, faithful devotees such as the Skorpek Lord, Nesfetra the Flayer, strategic masterminds like Nemesaur Anhutek, who has raised the Destroyer's madness and seeks power as Amantar's right hand, and cryptic cabals such as the Hyper-Ankh Conclave. Portions of its cursed legion have spread widely, each devoted to the Necrosaur's goal of uncovering the Nightbringer's shards and wresting them from those that hold them prisoner. Those Necron tombs its armies invade are overcome by wave of the Necrosaur's madness, and the battles in their depths are horrifically destructive, with no thought given to territorial gains or to the treasures of ancient days or dynastic regalia. Indeed, this is yet another fear of the galaxy's Necron nobles, that even should they submit to Amantar, its destructive zealotry will wipe their civilization from existence. In recent astronomic cycles, Amantar itself has been detected to the galactic southeast. Necron legions, formerly of varied dynasties, but now loyal only to the Necrosaur, have entered the region known to the Imperium as Ultramar, a stronghold of many Necron tombs. The Silent King and his Triarch, distracted by the conflict in the Nephilim sector, as well as their burgeoning civil war with the Sautek dynasty, have thus far not deigned to confront Amantar. So long as the Necrosaur's attentions remain diverted towards the realm of Ultramar, the Triarch has no desire to open a further front. Some of those minor dynasties caught in the path of Amantar's advance have offered resistance, but thus far, most have been crushed and absorbed. Death's Paradigm. Amantar's chimeric form incorporates elements seen amongst many Destroyer subcults. Its serpentine lower body echoes the Ophidian. Its emetic weaponry recalls the Hexmark, while its bladed limbs bear the hallmark of the Skorpek. To some Necrons, especially those who are fanatically loyal to the Necrosaur and retain some intellect, this is no coincidence. They believe Amantar to be the prophetic origin of these murderous efficiencies, forms which the subcults are mere splintered reflections. Its disciples hail Amantar as the only being able to synthesize all of death's tools. The Necrosaur's Crusade. The tomb worlds the Necrosaur successfully invades are co-opted into its nihilistic vision. In the time it takes for it to amass its forces once more and leave, a subjugated tomb world already seethes with Necrons suffering the Destroyer madness. Some choose this fate, either in fear of Amantar or in thrall to it. There have been fallen tombs where the master program appeared to suffer corruption, initiating rapid schedules of conversion of the tomb world's unwilling inhabitants, whether still in their stasis crypts or already awake. Nor is the Destroyer madness limited to those modified Necrons. Under Amantar's influence, shambling hordes of warriors and immortals launch into their nearest foes, as often hacking or bludgeoning them to death in spasming blows as killing from afar. Even the Necrosaur's war engines appear affected. Rather than heeding dynastic codes, Their murder-hungry crews plough bloody furrows in the enemy ranks, unleashing indiscriminate salvos as they charge. Much of the Necrosaur's cursed legion also teem with numerous packs of flesh-hungry flayed ones. Its forces frequently cause so much death that these mechanical ghouls are drawn in numbers rarely seen before. They tear their way from their carnal dimension and hungrily lurch after those fleeing the destroyers. In some instances, Amantar's relatively sane strategists have factored flayed ones into its invasion protocols, a feat few nobles are capable of. Amantar has even gone as far as to commit especially bloody massacres on worlds that hold no tomb world for it to invade. These atrocities have been purely to lure flayed ones into its influence. Rather than drive them away as other Necrons do, it instead shepherds them on to its next war zone as disposable and gory chattel. Mark of the Necrosaur. Most of the Necrosaur's forces follow it closely from one crusade of annihilation to the next. At times, however, Amantar dispatches portions of its cursed legion under the command of one of its Oblivion Court generals. These groups operate on distant missions for its cause, sometimes for lengthy periods, but will eventually gravitate back into the orbit of their fell prophet. The composition of its cursed legion fluctuates, with insanity and destruction claiming some, and new influxes of followers replacing the fallen. Amantar's forces thus frequently include soldiery from multiple dynasties, all claimed for its nightmarish agenda. Their unity of purpose is displayed by some of the Necrosaur's followers in the use of a unique glyph. Some Necrons bear it upon their living metal bodies, obliterating former dynastic glyphs, or summon it in a glitching holographic construct. Other representations are etched into the flanks of war engines, or gouged into the walls of subjugated tomb complexes. The War for Nova Magnor. Stellar System Analytic Expository, Voxlog, Excerpt 1006, 10118. Formal Voxlog of Rogue Trader Loth III, operating in my chartered capacity as an Explorator Supplementum for the Greater Ultramarian Reclamation, Vespertor Front. I now submit my initial assessment of the Heliodras system for your consideration, Lord Titus. I am pleased to report the system boasts considerable Imperial habitation, in line with the tithe logs furnished to me by the Logisticars. This is in contrast to the last two supposedly loyal star systems which, as per my previous reports, turned out to be rather more hostile than advertised. The agri-world of Idaris, in particular, is worthy of your plenipotentiary's attentions. As I make this recording, Lady Vesta is already preparing her delegation for deployment to that world. Of note also is the frontier world, which I would suggest deserves reclassification as an industrialized pre-hive world of Nova Magnor. This planet appears to have exceeded its tithe contributions on the last 3 occasions, and initial Vox overtures regarding its incorporation into the 500 worlds have met with a promising reception. You will find appended to this report my Servo Scouts' assays of the feral world Cornovium and the gas giant Lyrior, both of which present potential for intensive resource exploitation and, in Cornovium's case, even recruitment into your own ranks. Exploration of Lyrior was, regrettably, cut short. Meanwhile, any surveys of the system's extensive asteroid belt are at this time impossible. In both cases, this is due to significant Orkoid presence. While my forces are not inconsiderable, I would prefer not to expend them in skirmishes, when there remain so many systems for my fleet to assess. I would also note, my lord, that the continuing Orc threat in this system applies a pressure to its human populations that can do no harm to our diplomatic position with these people. Further notes and data fields appended to Log Supplemental 20000. I remain your faithful and loyal servant, Rogue Trader Dioncella Loth III. Expertum Terminus. Ask no questions, lest you be answered. A shadowed trail. The world of Darius in the Heliodras system struggled in the jaws of High Fleet Leviathan. The Tyrannids had pierced the extended flank of the Vespator front, a barbed sting driven directly at Darius. Intent on saving the precious agri-world, Captain Titus's fleet had made all speed to intercept. Idara swarmed with Tyrannid bioforms. Its arable towers ran with blood waterfalls, as aliens fought their way up, level by level, overwhelming the dug-in Ultramar defense auxilia and local militia troops. Miles-wide macro paddocks had become charnel abattoirs as thousands of hormagaunts tore apart panicked livestock and herders alike. In the void above, a shoal of hive ships clustered around the world, preparing to drain Idris dry. Titus's fleet struck like a thunderbolt. Directed by Commodore Silver, Ultramarines and Defense Fleet warships caught the monstrous Tyrannid biovessels in elegant outflanking maneuvers and engaged them in brutal firefights. Thunderhawks streaked the void as Second Company warriors took the fight into the pulsating innards of the largest hive ships, carving through macabre living chambers and wave after wave of monsters to plant massive crack charges. Their work done, the survivors pulled back to their extraction craft as the hive ships shuddered and ruptured with the fury of internal detonations. While the wounded biovessels wrestled with damaged ultramarine cruisers, salvos of dropcraft punched through Idaris's atmosphere, followed in by Thunderhawks carrying battle tanks and spearheads of Outrider squads. The drop pod slammed down to disgorge Ultramarines at key strategic points across the planet. What followed was an intense purge operation that lasted 3 local day rotations. By the end of the first, the swarm's momentum had been arrested by a series of targeted strikes and vital infrastructure made safe. By the end of the second, Legatus Minervus and her auxiliary regiments had made planetfall in support of the Ultramarines, driving the surviving Tyranids into killing zones. As the last daylight faded on the 3rd day rotation, Captain Titus led the final strike in person, dueling a hulking Tyrannid Prime whose synaptic signal still held its swarm together, and taking the monster's head with his blade. Ominous fortune. Before fighting on Idaris had even ended, Captain Titus had his advisors tracing the alien's origin point. A major incursion by a tendril of High Fleet Leviathan into Ultramarian space could not be countenanced. More splinters, or even a larger fleet, might lurk out there still. Astrogation data, the divinations of Astropath Cornelius, and records of distress calls collated by chapter serfs painted a vivid image of the splinter fleet's progress. The strategic adepts presented Titus with a clear trail to follow by the time he returned to his flagship from Idaris' surface. Yet along that route, which led beyond the border of the 500 worlds, was an anomaly. It was a planet, Nova Magnor, recorded as recently reclaimed for Ultramar. The world was populous, a place of burgeoning industry and settlements that would grow into hives within a few generations. Yet the Tyranids had avoided the planet entirely. They had gone out of their way to do so. To Titus and those few of his battle brothers who had served in the Death Watch, this was a clear and ominous sign. For Tyranids behaved in this fashion only when confronted with the Necron tomb world. Though Imperial Magi Biologis still had no real idea why. The danger simmering beneath the surface of Nova Magnor could not be ignored, and was indeed potentially even more pressing than the possibility of more Tyranids approaching Ultramar's borders. Captain Titus gave the order without hesitation. His fleet made for Nova Magnor to eliminate the Necron threat. A world in torment. The world of Nova Magnor had been noted by Ultramarian emissaries as having been colonized relatively recently. They reported a planet of growing urban and industrial zones interspersed with increasingly populated belts of scrub wilderness populated by hard-working Imperial citizens. The planet that confronted Titus's fleet as it approached, however, was quite different. Titus's force spread out into a dispersed combat formation as they entered Nova Magnor's high orbital zone. The fleet's Vox receptors detected broken signals from the planet below. Distress calls, frantic orders, and garbled snatches of exchanges between hard-pressed planetary militia forces described metal-skinned attackers with glowing green eyes. Auger systems flooded with spiking geothermal and electromagnetic readings that billowed from deep beneath Nova Magnor's surface, intertwined with esoteric energy signatures deemed neither natural nor imperial in origin. Roiling storm clouds occluded Nova Magnor from pole to pole. Together with the energistic interference waves, they conspired to hide whatever was happening on the surface from those in the void above. Yet, there could be little doubt that the tomb world had awoken, and Nova Magnor's people were under attack. Titus wasted no time in convening a council of war within the stratagem of his flagship, the Righteous Fury. Some of his advisors, ancient Gabriel most forthright amongst them, argued for an immediate combat drop on First Brand, Nova Magnor's capital settlement. There lay the obstinate Bastion, which was both a formidable command fortress and also the seat of power of the planetary governor, Adrica Gallo. Once Obstinus Bastion was secured, or retaken if necessary, and Governor Gallo's status confirmed, workable strategic practicals could be cogitated and put into action without any wasted time. Cooler heads, most notably Legatus Minervus, proposed initial reconnaissance flyovers, surface scrying by flights of servo skulls, and a concentrated effort to build a broad theoretical before commencing operations. It was a mark of the respect in which Titus and his brothers held Minervus that, despite her status as a human, her suggestions were given as much weight as theirs. Before Titus could pronounce any decision, however, fresh alarms tolled throughout the ship. Something enormous was rising from Nova Magnor's surface, something that caused the storm's vortices to part as though a continental landmass was breaching amidst violent seas. An immense Necron warship ascended into low orbit. The vessel dwarfed even the largest of Titus's ships, and for several alarming moments, as captains maneuvered to address the new threat in their combat sphere and interceptor wings spilled from hangars, it seemed the Tombship was about to tear a gaping wound in the Ultramarines' fleet. Yet auguries revealed that the vessel showed signs of heavy damage, much of it appearing to have been inflicted by Necron weaponry. Furthermore, whoever was at the Tombship's helm seemed disinterested in combat. Though its functional batteries unleashed blistering arcs of energy fire against those Imperial vessels too slow to clear its path, the vessel did not plunge into battle, but instead continued to break away from Nova Magnor entirely. War from above. Captain Titus ordered immediate interception by his heaviest warships and a full boarding deployment by his Ultramarines, leaving his lighter vessels to keep watch in case more Tombships should appear. Titus took a boarding pod with the best of the Second Company and led the attack himself. Whatever purpose this alien vessel might have in escaping Nova Magnor, he would not allow it to survive to threaten other Imperial worlds. Whilst Commodore Silver's battleships traded punishing salvos with the warship, Defense Fleet and Ultramarine Void Fighter squadrons cleared a path through the Necron's interceptors for the boarding torpedoes to strike home. Amidst the roar of melter drills and the hammering of bolter fire, Captain Titus and his brothers brought the fury of Ultramar to the interior of the Necron ship. The Ultramarines pushed hard towards their assigned targets. They traded fire with lurching masses of Necron soldiery, the ghoulish androids stalking through strobe-lit gloom and coiling gunsmoke with their Gauss weapons blazing. A series of cut and thrust flanking maneuvers led by Sergeant Mitaris saw each fresh Necron defense line broken open or cut apart in withering crossfires. Deeper the Ultramarines drove, a gladius thrust into the heart of the vessel. It soon became apparent the aliens concentrated their defense around a chamber near the ship's core. This, it transpired, was not its command bridge, but instead a space between a shrine and a laboratory, at whose center sat a bulky and intricate-looking Necron artifact. There, beneath leaping arcs of viridian energy, Titus and his battle brothers met an imperious android noble, accompanied by elite bodyguards and what scraps remained of the ship's garrison. Just like their vessel, many of the defenders showed signs of prior battle damage and, just like their vessel, they soon fell to the measured fury of the Ultramarines. In the wake of victory, Captain Titus inspected the artifact the Necrons had fought so hard to defend, sharing his findings with the fleet support specialists via data X-load. He was on the verge of having the thing rigged with melter charges when a voxhail from one of his fleet's Adeptus Mechanicus support ships came through. The voice belonged to Archmagos Oct, not an individual Titus trusted, but one whose specialist knowledge regarding Xenos technologies he grudgingly respected. Oct warned that the artifact might be a weapon of enormous power, and that destroying it in uncontrolled conditions risked triggering an energy cascade that could annihilate the Ultramarines fleet, and perhaps even the world below. If, however, it could be transported down to the Adeptus Mechanicus Forge Shrine situated in First Brand, Oct believed he could safely study and neutralize the device. Titus considered simply destroying the artifact despite the risks, yet there were too many unknowns. What was this device, and why had the Necrons been so intent on getting it away from Nova Magnor? How was it connected to the violence erupting on the planet below, and what had these Necrons been trying to escape? Who or what had so badly damaged them and their ship? Disquieted but determined to press on with his duty, Titus gave permission for Archmagos Oct to take custody of the device before the Tombship was scuttled, while he made immediate preparations for a combat drop. Gabriel's aggressive counsel had won for now, though Titus also commanded intelligence-gathering efforts stepped up across the planet to inform the campaign ahead. It was time to take the fight planetside, and hopefully get some answers to his questions. Beneath the storms, Strikeforce Titus took to their gunships and plunged down through the cloud layer above First Band. Lightning rent the skies. Screaming storm winds drove rain and ash against armor-glass canopies. Then the Ultramarines were through the storms, and the maelstrom of the local strategic Vox net flooded their receptors. An apocalyptic landscape spread out beneath them. First Brand sat north of Nova Magnor's equator, the most significant of several cities dotted through the wilderness region known as the Iron Wilds. This vista of mottled grey-green scrublands and stark human habitation had been shattered. Jagged chasms disfigured the landscape. Many glowed sullen red, hinting at lava flows churning in their depths. From others spilled an eerie green radiance. Some of the chasms had torn through the bedrock under the settlements. The cause of such violent upheaval was plain to see. Enormous Necron structures appeared to have forced their way up through the planet's surface and now loomed monstrous and sinister over a landscape their emergence had tortured with tectonic shocks. The largest of these structures had apparently demolished a portion of Steel Heights sprawl as it emerged. Even as the Ultramarines' gunship swept down to alight atop First Brand's obstinate bastion, Titus was passing strategic data and noting those locations where the distant flicker of muzzle flare and energy detonations revealed ongoing battles between human and Necron forces amidst the Iron Wilds. Before he left his Thunderhawk, he was disseminating strategic commands that saw Ultramar Defense Auxilia swing into action aboard his orbiting fleet. While Titus, Gabriel, Mataras, and their honor guard marched through Obstinus Bastion towards Gallows' throne room, landing craft emblazoned with the Ultramarine symbols were beginning their own atmospheric drops. These craft brought reinforcements to local Imperial battlefronts, Fortis Bastion in the west and the inner districts of Steel Heights, Orbital Defense Batteries Delta 04 and Halo 09, and the stricken Munitorum Supply Hub 242, that lay southwest from First Brand across the polluted wastes of the Barrens. Amidst the whirl of orbital activity, a separate flight of shuttles flurried down toward First Brand. These, arrayed in the colors of Mars, made for Nova Magnor's Forge Shrine, where it rose over the settlement's inner districts. Aboard the largest of them rode Archmagos Oct and his Xenotech prize. Captain Titus's audience with Governor Gallo was brief. Once formalities had been observed, he cut to the strategic heart of the situation and informed her that he and his officers would be taking theatre command until the crisis was resolved. The governor was no fool. Though some amongst her subordinates bristled at Titus's directness, she was glad to see the Ultramarines led the fight against the Necron threat. What point was there in becoming part of Ultramar, after all, if one could not call upon its foremost defenders in such desperate times? Gallo's officers furnished Titus with a full appraisal of events preceding his arrival. How the tomb structures had erupted through Nova Magnor's crust, how attacks had begun against outlying Imperial holdings, but how, so far at least, these offensives seemed scattered and without clear direction. The primary tomb complex, designated Site Umbra, had yet to put forth any Necron forces, or indeed show signs of life, beyond the terrifying moment some hours before, when the Tombship had detached from its superstructure and risen into the heavens. Drawing on his centuries of experience in the Death Watch, Titus speculated that the tomb complex might have awakened in response to some threat. Maybe, given the damage to the Tombship, even localized Necron civil war, but that the legions within were either quiescent or battling one another. It might even be that the noble's departure had disrupted the awakening process. Either way, this might explain the lackluster attacks. It also presented an opportunity. If the Ultramarines launched a strike with an explosive device of sufficient power, they could knock out the tomb complex and the legions it contained. At a stroke, they could end the threat to Nova Magnor before it had truly materialized. Ominous advance. Barely a local standard hour after touching down atop Obstinous Bastion, Titus and his Ultramarines took to the air again. This time their gunships bore them through Nova Magnor's turbulent skies to set down in the cold shadow of Site Umbra. No weapon system stirred in defense of the silent tomb complex. No legions marched from its archways. As their gunships lifted off and settled into a holding pattern, the Ultramarines advanced without any sign of resistance. In their midst hovered a Gravbuyer, shepherded by Martian tech magi and carrying a precious vortex bomb brought from the Righteous Fury reliquary at Titus's command. This would be the doomsday weapon the Ultramarines would awaken and then set on a timer at the tomb's heart before retreating. The resultant empiric detonation should consume the Xenos stronghold and end its threat. Yet as Titus and his forces advanced into Site Umbra, through cavernous galleries and across architectural chasms, they questioned what manner of threat that was. The emerald lights pulsing along its maze of corridors seemed sickly and arrhythmic. Fortified doorways had been blasted open or atomized, while canoptic constructs lay strewn and broken. Deeper into the tomb, the Ultramarines found Necrons hanging out of stasis crypts or sprawled in drifts, the same unhealthy light glowing in their ocular lenses with eerie synchronicity. Whatever had laid the toppled Necrons low had not seemingly been anything so direct as gunfire or blades. Undamaged but utterly incapacitated, they slumped in their hundreds, an ominous carpet of metal bodies of which the Ultramarines clambered as they advanced. Titus's terse order ended any thoughts of taking weapons to the lifeless androids. Such efforts would slow the Ultramarines' advance to a crawl, he warned, and might risk breaking whatever strange enchantment held the Necrons. Instead, Titus's strike force toiled onwards, ever more unsettled and watchful, while the tech priests in their midst guided the vortex bomb and muttered amongst themselves in disquieted binaric. At last, Titus's force emerged from a huge doorway to find themselves on the edge of a cavernous chamber packed with ziggurats of complex machinery. The space was several times larger than the Righteous Fury embarkation deck, its ceiling so high it was lost amidst lazily curling viridian mists. At its center rose a column of techno-architecture at least 100 feet in diameter that soared away into occluded heights. Here, surely, was the heart of the mysterious stricken tomb. Titus ordered the bomb to be primed at the base of the column and left to do its work. starting to believe their mission might be completed without battle, the Ultramarines advanced into the chamber. Onslaught. As the Ultramarines explored the quiescent tomb, ancient alien intelligences marked their progress. Android minds calculated strike patterns and identified weaknesses in the Space Marines' armor. Many wished to attack at once, but they were held back by the will of one infinitely greater and more terrible than they, an entity that awaited the most brutally optimal moment to launch its ambush. Titus's strike force had crossed half the distance to the Titanic pillar when contact runes started flickering on their auspicators. The Marines swept their surroundings with their helm autosensors, switching through vision modes, trying to find the source of the readings. Scattered heaps of Necron soldiers lay as still as ever. Arcs of energy leapt between mysterious machines, while eldritch glyph patterns flickered just as they had a moment before. No other sign of movement could be detected. Still, the Space Marines' warriors instinctively prickled with foreboding. Titus ordered all haste made towards the pillar, detailing Metaurus and his Blade Guard veterans to watch over the Gravbire, while spreading the rest of his force out into a mutually supportive configuration with angles of fire in all directions. A full minute passed, during which the Ultramarines advanced double time, panning their weapons smoothly in search of threats. The tech priests in their midst scurried and stumbled in an undignified manner to keep pace with their transhuman protectors. Static hissed through the strike force's vox channels. The Auspex readings continued to flicker and ghost. Flares of iridescent light bloomed amidst the Space Marines' formation so suddenly that even preternatural Adeptus Astartes reflexes could not entirely save them. 6 armed android horrors burst out of each light bloom, their myriad pistols spitting emetic energy beams. Ultramarines toppled, with inimical energies dancing over their convulsing forms. 2 tech priests were slain in a split second. The last was saved only by the bulwark of Metarius' storm shield, the veteran sergeant interposing himself between the shocked adept and the hex-marked destroyer with incredible swiftness. Titus's warriors pivoted smoothly to hammer fire into the ambushers in their midst. Even as they did, serpentine androids burst up from conduits in the floor or erupted through crystalline panels in the flanks of the nearest ziggurats. Shards of spinning crystal seemed to tumble for an instant in slow motion before the Ophidian destroyers slammed into their prey. Battle Brothers were sliced open by enormous blades or pierced through eye lenses and armor joints by foot-long metal talons. Yet the survivors fought back with roaring chainswords and heavy bolt pistols. A squad of eradicators under Sergeant Osmadius unleashed blasts from their melter rifles that reduced several attackers to vapor and molten metal. Yet now gorse fire was raining from above as locust destroyers thrummed down through the swirling mists. Even as lurid grey portals opened about the pillar's base to disgorge whirling, clattering packs of Scorpec destroyers into the fight. Titus's mouth set in a grim line as he locked blades with his ghoulish foe. His strike force was surrounded. Beset by horrors. Assailed from all sides by nightmarish foes, lesser warriors might have panicked. Certainly, the tech priest covering behind Sergeant Metaurus was gibbering binaric prayers and looking ready to scramble under the Gravbire in his terror. Instead, the Ultramarines unleashed an immediate and punishing counterattack. Led by ancient Gabriel, most of Titus's assault troops clenched into a mailed fist of power-armored might and drove hard for the base of the pillar. Their blades sang a song of ruination. Destroyers fell before them, smashed bodies shimmering as they discorporated. Other squads dropped into firing positions and raked the ambushers with shots as Titus, Metarius, and his brethren hastened the Gravbire and its last petrified attendant in Gabriel's wake. Moment by moment, the Ultramarines took more casualties. Battle Brothers grunted with pain or snarled oaths over the Vox networks as blades hacked and emerald beams of energy flinched. The pair of apothecaries accompanying the strike force dashed from one fallen warrior to the next to administer hemosealants and stims or reclaim gene seed from the dead. Destroyers fell back, smashed and blasted, shimmering away amidst localized phase fields, only for more of them to surge from the portals blazing about the pillar's base. Foot by torturous foot, the Ultramarines battered their way closer to their destination. Then came a coruscating blast of energy, flashing down from where the mighty pillar vanished into the mists. It struck the last tech priest and blasted him into a fine crimson mist, along with one of the blade guard who tried to shield him. Captain Titus looked up in cold fury to see a truly monstrous shape surging down the pillar's flank, barbed metal tail coiling behind it, glowing eyes fixed upon him. Necrosaur Amentar had come to butcher its prey. With the last tech priest dead, any hope of awakening the vortex bomb was lost. The situation only grew worse as, with Amentar's coming, the strange light pulsing in the eyes of the quiescent Necrons blazed cold and poisonous. All across the chamber floor, android figures staggered to their feet, fat emerald sparks drizzling from their inner workings, metal digits curling into grasping claws. As the first of them shambled forward to cut off the Ultramarines' line of retreat, their monstrous master dropped the last 30 feet and crashed down amidst the battle brothers of Squad Gaius. The Necrosaur struck and whirled with terrifying speed for a creature of such bulk, taking Ultramarines apart with macabre efficiency. In a matter of heartbeats, the situation for the Ultramarines had become untenable, victory beyond their grasp. Knowing nothing would be gained by staging some suicidal last stand, Titus ordered the retreat. Bolt guns thundered, grenades boomed, and melter beams hissed draconic fury as Titus's warriors blasted a path through their converging foes back to the chamber entrance. Behind them, Squad Gaius fought a selfless rearguard action, displaying courage and honor to the last. They gave their lives to hold back the Necrosaur and its murderous hosts just long enough for their battle brothers to disengage. Bloody ascent. Set upon from all sides by hordes of warriors and immortals, Titus and his surviving squads forged back towards the surface with grim desperation. In dark and echoing vaults, carrion heaps of fallen androids writhed apart as the Ultramarines passed between them, clawing living metal hands snatching at the racing battle brothers. The poisonous light of madness burned from hundreds of mechanical ocular lenses that fixed pitilessly onto the Ultramarines as they retreated. As they fought their way higher through the eldritch maze, Titus's force encountered cryptex and their canoptic assistants, forcibly dismembering Necrons and grafting grossly oversized weapon limbs onto their shuddering bodies. They were set upon by fresh packs of destroyers, or by blade-fingered flayed ones draped in dripping human skins. Canoptic constructs loomed from the darkness on stilt-like limbs to rake Titus's force with beams of eldritch energy, or drift down from on high like colossal arachnids, wreathed in flitting clouds of scarabs. The Ultramarines overcame those enemies that blocked their path and evaded those they did not have to fight. With every clash, their casualties grew. Their ammunition ran dry, and, upon a soaring bridge over a glowing chasm, another brave squad was forced to turn at bay and give their lives to hold back the pursuing Necrosaur. The Ultramarines battled their way up a ramp and across one final cavernous hall, reduced to bludgeoning a path through shambling android hordes that battered and tore at their victims in mindless rage. A final charge by Titus and his surviving warriors, a shattering of metal bodies and sparking of blades on talons, and the Ultramarines were out into driving rain under storm-churned skies as their Thunderhawks touched down ahead. Thumping up the gunship's ramps, not a warrior unwounded, and almost half their number left slain in the depths. They made their escape. The Necrons would not have them this day. Titus was last aboard, waiting until the final limping Ultramarines had been helped past him by Apothecary Marcos, as gorse blasts whipped around them and chewed into the Thunderhawk's hull. As his gunship lifted off, Titus remained on its closing ramp and watched, his face a stony mask, as pursuing Necrons spilled from the tomb. He ignored the emerald energy beam streaking past his Thunderhawk as it rose away from sight Umbra. Titus's gaze remained locked with the cold eyes of the Necrosaur, where it lurked amidst the shadows of a yawning archway. Even when the ramp had closed and the flight of gunship was racing back towards Obstinous Bastion, Titus felt the monster's merciless gaze upon him. Champions of Duty. A dark prize. When Archmagos Oct swept into the Forge Shrine with his Xenotech prize under heavy guard, there were some half-hearted protests from the local tech priests. These were soon quashed thanks to a combination of Oct's rank, his preeminent Martian status, and a series of binaric override codes which he plied like a whip to subdue the Forge Shrine's tech priests. Satisfied that he would not be challenged or disturbed, Oct set to work. He had told the Ultramarines that the bulky device was a Necron weapon, and in a manner of speaking, he had not lied. The teachings of his secret cult and centuries of Xenotech expertise had helped him recognize it as an especially ornate Tesseract vault. The artifact itself might not be a weapon, but the Catan shard, doubtless imprisoned within, was dangerous and powerful indeed. Oct's hemopumps raced at the thought. His belief that the dragon and its kin were angelic aspects of the Omnissiah was absolute. His prefrontal cogitators danced with images of the blessings that would surely be his when he set this avatar of the machine god free. Champions of Duty. The battered Ultramarines returned to news of escalating hostilities that only heightened the shame of defeat. Within Obstinous Bastion's opulent stratagem gallery, with adepts, servitors and officers of the Nova Magnor defense militia whirling around them in controlled panic, Titus and his comrades felt each strategic update like incoming enemy fire. Regions previously untouched by attack were now reporting structures rising from beneath the ground and phalanxes of killers assailing their defenses. The hydroponic farms of the southern pole were being attacked by skimming swarms of Locust destroyers, Canoptic scarabs, and light attack craft that swept in to strafe the outmatched defense militia troops again and again. From both Aloysium and Ventura sprawls came simultaneous, terrified reports of a towering abomination clad in tattered black robes and wielding a colossal scythe, which drifted at the head of the attacking Necrons, and at whose coming soldiers withered into dead husks as its shadow engulfed them. The batteries amongst the Magnatum Heights were under intense bombardment from alien war engines and on the brink of annihilation. The macro granaries and strip mines in the Basalt Depression were being overrun by lurching masses led by serpentine metal fiends. The litany of horrors seemed never-ending. Yet the worst development, Titus could not help but believe, was his own doing. Sight Umbra and its satellites, Sight Obscurum to the north and Sight Dusk to the east, had awoken with a vengeance. Murderous hosts poured from their tombs, rank upon rank of android soldiery and masses of destroyers, supported by columns of eldritch war engines. To Titus's experienced eye, the legions lacked the almost obsessive precision and mechanistic cohesion usually displayed by Necrons at war. Instead, any semblance of order collapsed as they advanced swiftly into battle without any pretense of caution or contingency. Servo-Skull Vit capture showed how their formations fractured when they detected humans, no matter how few or unthreatening. Destroyer packs and phalanxes of warriors peeled off from the advancing masses almost at random to chase down retreating remnants of defense militia companies or encircling minor defensive redoubts. These breakaway forces did not halt their attacks until their unlucky victims were annihilated, at which point the surviving Necrons appeared to lose direction for a time, roaming until some new prey presented itself. Yet for all this aberrant behavior, the primary thrusts of the attacks were taking their toll. A massive host had smashed into Fortis Bastion, preceded yet another of the macabre Reaper-like figures. The Necrons had reportedly brought down several sections of the Bastion's ramparts and, despite intervention by several companies of defense auxilia and limited bombardment ordered by Commodore Silver, were on the verge of overrunning the fortress. In the wilds between 1st Brand and Battery Delta 04, clash of armour and skirmishing infantry swirled across the scrubland. Led by Legatus Miniverse, the 30th Macragge Defence Auxilia had stiffened flying columns of local forces and now sought to drive back phalanxes intent on the battery's destruction. Meanwhile, across the Barrens, requests for aid from Unitorum Supply Hub 242 had turned to prayer and evacuation plans as alien structures continued to erupt from beneath the compound. Even as Apothecary Marcos saw to Titus's injuries and Circe did what they could to clean his battered war gear, the captain issued orders. He released his last reserve forces from orbit, prioritizing those conflicts that could still be won and the most vital infrastructure to secure. He commanded Silver to bring more ships into low-orbit bombardment positions, warning him to beware the huge defense pylons that now began to hurl columns of emerald lightning into the atmosphere. Yet all the while, Titus's attention was drawn to the masses of Necrons closing in upon the outskirts of 1st Brand. He thought again of the merciless and unwavering stare of the Necron's monstrous master, and knew that it had no intention of abandoning its prey. Titus thought too of the strange artifact, called a weapon by Archimagos Oct, and now sequestered in the Forge Shrine north of Obstinous Bastion. If the tech priest's suspicions were correct, what devastation might the enemy unleash? Titus could see well enough that the situation had escalated far beyond initial projections of enemy strengths and aggression levels. He knew the Codex would have him pull his precious forces back and call upon fresh reinforcements, before striking again from a position of strength. Space Marines were not created to hold ground, while the number of defense auxilia and militia at his command was far from inexhaustible. Nevertheless, he was master of the Watch, a defender of Ultramar. If he abandoned the Nova Magnorians to their fate now, what message did that send? Where was the courage and honor in such a course? Instead, Captain Titus ordered astropathic calls for aid to be sent out at once, and commanded that his forces and those of the locals dig in and weather the storm. He vowed to end whatever this strange new threat was, here and now. It would not be permitted to spread and imperil the reclamation of the 500 worlds. Encroaching doom. War now raged on multiple fronts across the surface of Nova Magnor. As hours passed, the intensity of the conflict only increased. Led in their efforts by Adeptus Cornelius, Titus's astropaths reached out through the void to call for aid. The response came surprisingly swiftly. Within a matter of hours, it was sent from a smaller 4th Company squadron purging Orc pirates in an asteroid belt just beyond the system's heliopause. The squadron would send what aid it could, a strike cruiser bearing a complement of battle brothers and accompanied by several auxiliary troop ships. Yet transit to Nova Magna would take time. There would be no immediate relief for Titus's armies. Having done all he could to provide orders to his forces in the field, Titus took a few precious moments to meditate upon the situation in a quiet side chapel. The abortive attack on Site Umbra had at least answered some questions. It seemed a sound assumption that the monstrous ambusher had also been the terror from which the Tombship and its occupants fled. Infighting had indeed gripped the Necrons on Nova Magnor. Titus recalled the sickly light pulsing through the tomb and the aberrant behavior of its denizens. He did not know what the creature was, or what malediction it had seemingly spread amongst its kin. Chaplain Leandros would doubtless warn against trying to understand, lest Titus be tainted in the attempt. Yet he could not shake the feeling there were aspects of the situation he was not seeing and could not understand with the information he had. Ignorance was a blind spot that led him into the ambush inside Umbra. It might undo him again if he was not careful. Weapons of war. Titus's contemplations led him back to the question of the artifact. He suspected the noble commanding the Tombship had been trying to get whatever it was far from the reach of the monster inside Umbra. If so, did bringing it back to the surface risk aiding this foe? He resolved to go at once to the Forge Shrine and press Archmagus Oct for results. Either device would be neutralized quickly, or Titus would have it taken back into orbit, then jettisoned into the system star. The Aurora incident had left the captain with little enough trust of tech priests and their secrets. Before he could follow this resolution, however, an urgent voxhail called him back to the Strategium Gallery. The situation had worsened throughout First Brand. The Ultramarines were needed on the front lines to prevent a catastrophic collapse. In this moment, Titus knew his place was at the Strategium table. From the Bastion's command sanctum, he divided his available Ultramarines into 3 strike forces. One, led by Gabriel, he sent south to Battery Halo 09. Another, under Sergeant Mataras, moved to counter Necron forces pushing from the west, while the third thundered north aboard repulsors to intercept an attack from Site Dusk. Powering up the Labourer's Way, the spearhead encountered platoons of militia in panicked retreat. Behind them came Necron phalanxes, in whose midst floated a terrible spectre of death. Several times the height of a space marine, the God Shard, was swathed in tattered robes that crackled with glitching artifacts. Dark energies leapt from its eyes to rake the fleeing militia, who crumbled into ash wherever they were struck. Other luckless soldiers appeared to perish merely due to the monster's presence, collapsing and drained of all vitality. Watching through auto-sensors and vid feeds, Titus commanded his warriors to disembark and engage the Necron soldiery, giving the routed militia time to rally, while the repulsors focused fire upon the floating avatar of death. Even as his strike force complied, Titus sought to reroute marine aerial assets to provide fire support, and ordered militia reserve companies forward to strengthen the line. Roadways and ruins became battlegrounds as the Ultramarines and Necrons exchanged volleys of fire. Android soldiers fell sparking, Ultramarines reeled back with grievous wounds, yet it was the scythe-wielding horror that wrought true devastation in those desperate, bloody minutes. Shells and energy beams struck it with no more effect than a zephyr of wind. Sweeping forward with its rows whirling, the monster swung its scythe into the flank of a repulsor with such cataclysmic force that the tank was not only all but cloven in two, but was also sent crashing and rolling through the Ultramarines' lines before detonating. A second tank was destroyed moments later as the Death Avatar speared it with void black beams from its eyes and then, with a cruelly slow clenching gesture of one fist, caused the damaged repulsor to crumple in upon its crew. As the abomination swept its scythe down to bisect battle brothers and send helmed heads tumbling, Titus grimly considered ordering a full retreat. Yet as more militia forces pressed up behind the battered Ultramarines' line, and squadrons of Stormhawk interceptors commenced attack runs against the Necrons, his strategy was borne out. The Death Avatar's rampage could not be stopped, yet the phalanxes supporting it were badly mauled, their advance faltering until, like some dark dream forgotten in the moments of waking, both they and the Godsplinter flickered and vanished. A new practical. Titus was under no illusion that the foe had perished. He suspected that they had instead been translocated to some other battlefield where the awful might of the Death Avatar could be better employed. Yet, for the moment, his intervention had brought a reprieve. As Medicaid personnel rushed between mauled squads and officers barked requests for reinforcements, Titus pulled up vid captures from this latest engagement, from the fight in the tomb, and from that first action aboard the fleeing tomb ship. Cross-referencing details, he confirmed the discrepancy that had been nagging at his mind. The glyph markings and heraldic colours worn by the fleeing noble and their warriors matched those of the seemingly infected androids from Site Umbra. Yet they differed from those displayed by the monstrous ambusher and its deformed destroyer hosts. Titus issued fresh commands to his forces, even as he requested and reviewed further data streams from across the planet's surface. Sure enough, some amongst the attacking legions belonged to what classified files named the Sautek dynasty. Yet an increasingly large percentage appeared instead to hail from the Sazarakan dynasty. Moreover, orbital scrying revealed that the lion's share of Sazarakan forces were emerging from Site Umbra, their numbers now well in excess of the remaining Sautek elements. Titus pictured again the glowing portal shimmering in the flanks of the colossal pillar at the tomb's heart. There, surely, was the primary source of the enemy's reinforcements. Sazarakan forces flooding in from off-world to augment what appeared to be co-opted Sautek Necrons who fought alongside them. Titus would have to entrust the matter of the artifact to Archmagos Oct, while he focused on cutting off the source of those extraplanetary reinforcements by re-attempting his earlier sabotage mission, and ensuring there was still an Ultramarine world to be reinforced when the Fourth Company flotilla arrived. Command-level strategic scrying revealed that Vortex Bomb remained at the heart of the underground tomb, its coral signature close to where the Ultramarines had been forced to abandon it. Further orbital auguries and subsurface energetic scans confirmed that Sites Obscurum and Dusk were connected via extended tunnel workings to Site Umbra. Titus knew that a hard fight surely awaited anyone attempting to access the primary tomb via these secondary sites, yet the odds of success were calculated to be far better than those offered by headlong assault against Site Umbra itself. Moreover, this time there would be no half measures. Titus would muster every surviving Ultramarine asset he had on Nova Magnor to ensure the attack was successful. His auxilia and the planet's militia would have to hold the attackers back in the meantime. There would be no pretense they would be able to do so for long. Losses would be grave. Yet Titus was certain that, if his tech marines could trigger the weapon, he could choke off the supply of reinforcements to Nova Magnor. He would turn the tide while it was still within his grasp to do so, and if the opportunity arose to bring death to the monster that had butchered so many battle brothers, then so much the better. The Necrosaur. A vector of insane zealotry cutting a sway through the dynasties of old, a transgressive vermin worshipper gnawing at the foundations of Necron society, an ancient punishment visited upon the Silent King and all his works. Necrosaur Amentar is viewed as all these things by his erstwhile kin, loathed and feared with an intensity surpassing even the atavistic terror memory of the Catan. It cares nothing for these condemnations, barely registers them, for it has its faith and crusade against life, and discards all else as irrelevant. The Necrosaur's cursed legion moved from world to world at the whim of their prophet. They charted a path through the interstellar darkness by teleportation gate and co-opted Tombship as chance allowed. Amentar, when it spoke of such matters at all to its Oblivion court, preached that its path was revealed to it in the whispers of Azagorod. For the faithful of the Necrosaur, this explanation was enough. By comparison, to those Necrons who believed the reassurances of Sazarek, the Silent King, no plan at all informed Amentar's lurching rampage. It was a maddened beast, its followers tragic casualties of a regrettable sickness, or else traitors to their dynasties and their people both. Once matters with Imhotep and his petty dynastic rebellion had been solved to Caesarec's satisfaction, the Necrosaur and its creatures would be gifted as swift and merciful an end as the tetrarchal codes permitted for such unnatural deviance. Whether Caesarec knew it or not, his claims were untrue. Something, be it supernatural or supercogitational, did lend direction to the Necrosaur's crusade. Its cursed legion homed in with inexorable accuracy upon tomb worlds that held one or more shards of the Nightbringer amongst their dynastic arsenals. The route they took was rarely obvious or direct. Their murderous madness drew them time and again to chase down pulsing cankers of organic life amidst the otherwise sterile perfection of the void. Their methods of travel were parasitic and opportunistic. Little patience existed amongst the Necrosaur's followers to waste time reinstating damaged dimensional conduits or tombships when they could simply pour through whatever gates existed and continue their mission of murder wherever fate, or perhaps the will of Azagorod, led them. Yet, with the relentlessness of death, that power led them to where the Cursed Legion could claim shards of the Nightbringer for their master. As yet, Necrosaur Amantar had not attempted to unshackle any of these god splinters, despite its fanatical worship of them. It gave no explanation for keeping the shards bound by Necron control, and its followers demanded none. Those capable of questioning this apparent blasphemy simply assumed that it was a mark of respect, possibly even a kindness. Indeed, in their shattered state, would the fragments of Asgarod suffer when unbound? Might they even, being stunted slivers of an infinitely greater whole, do harm to themselves or their worshippers? Some of Amantar's disciples wondered with disquiet how much indiscriminate devastation such a rampaging shard might cause. The Necrosaur's Oblivion Court did not question their master's ways, but they did know grim satisfaction with each new shard of the Nightbringer gathered for their profit. It was this singular crusade that had brought them to Nova Magnor, called Ushimekum by the Sautek dynasty, whose fringe world it had been. In the tomb complex beneath the world's surface, the venerable overlord Haskatep had long ago been entrusted with several ancient armaments, deemed useful but too unstable or tainted to sully the armories of a Sautek core world. It was one amongst these that had drawn the Cursed Legion through the world's teleportation nexus from the distant and now ruined Cesarec world of Masnok. The Necrosaur came personally to claim the Tesseract Vault, within which was imprisoned an especially potent shard of its god, Death's Deliverer. Amantar's host had erupted through dimensional gateways and into the depths of the Ushimekum Crypt, relying on shock and surprise to secure victory. They had discovered the tomb world still in the early stages of awakening. Canoptic constructs swarmed to defend the complex from this sudden invasion, directed by the Master Program and a handful of Sautek cryptex who had been overseeing the revivification of Haskatep's court. Behind them came those phalanxes of warriors and immortals that had been massing to support the initial sorties against the humans infesting the world's surface. Amantar and its destroyers tore through these lesser foes with cold and optimized ferocity. Yet despite their efforts, the Defender's Gambit had won just enough time for Haskatep and a portion of his retainers to complete a hasty awakening. Suffering from partial engrammatic discompression, still the Overlord had recognized the threat posed by the Necrosaur. He decided to escape aboard his flagship, bearing the weapons in his charge away into the stars, rather than let them fall into the clutches of so obviously monstrous a creature. Haskatep had escaped the onrushing annihilation promised by Amantar and its legions, only to meet the xenocidal wrath of Captain Titus's fleet. Either by dark chance, or at some more supernatural direction, had Archmagos Oct been positioned to lay claim upon the Tesseract Vault, only to bear it back to the surface in his deluded faith. And so, now, the shard languished still imprisoned, tantalizingly out of reach behind the walls of Firstbrand, but crooning its whispering into the Necrosaur's cortex, so that its presence and need for release goaded Amantar constantly. Anhutek's Snare. In the wake of the battle in the depths of the Ushimekum tomb complex and Amantar's subsequent corruption of the Master Program, the Necrosaur had entered a period of comparative lucidity. Its madness receded temporarily, leaving it able to reason and to plot a route to victory with its Oblivion Court, knowing that the bloody tide of their prophet's divine fervor would always flow back in, but unsure how soon the death fugue would grip it. Amantar's advisors had hastened to implement its plan. Analytic scans of the flesh creatures plaguing Ushimekum revealed that, while the majority were weak and flimsy things, there was a presence of heavily armored and gene-altered elites the humans called Space Marines. These were swiftly identified as the key obstacle to the release of Asgarod's imprisoned shard. If allowed to congregate around the Tesseract Vault, the Space Marines might stave off the Cursed Legion for a long time, perhaps even until more of their kind arrived to complicate matters further. This could not be allowed. Not only did the Necrosaur claim to be tormented by the increasing urgent whispers of its god, but also, this was not the only front on which its legions fought. There were other battles on other worlds, where Amantar's inspirational presence was needed to stoke the murderous fervor of its faithful. It was for this reason that Necrosaur Anhutek suggested the ambush. It was at her direction that Ushimek's tomb complex was rendered temporarily quiescent, the awakening of its legions unnaturally suspended. At the same time, Amantar's host drew back through the dimensional gateways to the vaults of Masnok, there to await the signal to attack. Meanwhile, expendable formations of lesser faithful were sent to apply pressure to outflung holdings across the planet, building where possible on the initial sorties made by Hashkatep's vanguard. The humans would all have to die eventually, for no life could be allowed to endure. If their deaths could be employed as a spur to goad the true enemy into incautious aggression, then so much the better. Sure enough, the Space Marines inevitably reacted to what they believed was a weakness and a chance to destroy the tomb complex before, as they believed, it awoke. What Anhutek could not have predicted was how hard Titus and his battle brothers would fight to tear free of this insidious trap. The Necrosaur had led the ambushing forces in person and had whetted its talons with the gore of the enemy elites. Yet, when the killing stopped, more than half of the prey had survived to retreat to the human stronghold. Killing stroke. With the escape of Titus and so many of his warriors, the Necron's hopes of triumph won through cunning waned. So too did the icy lucidity of Necrosaur Amantar. Charnel horror filled Ushimek's tomb complex in the wake of the Ultramarines' escape. Living metal claws dug into iron-hard bone, and wet meat slopped streaming through android innards as the flayed ones feasted on fallen space marines. Cryptex crooned with mad delight as their canoptic servants continued to dismember the hapless forms of the lower orders and forcibly transform them into unliving weapons. The corrupted master program aped their efforts on a far greater scale, ripping slumbering Necrons into wakefulness without care for the damage done to their personality engrams, and wreaking grotesque alterations upon their bodies, even as they thrashed and emitted distorted screams within the confines of their crypts. Moment by moment, the sounds of ghastly feasting and torturous conversion echoed and melded together. They took on a subsonic resonance that pulsed in time with the corpse light in the Necron's ocular lenses and shivered through the corridors and chambers of the tomb. It was a supernatural carrion drumbeat, a percussion of infernal insanity to which Necrosaur Amantar twitched and writhed in increasingly violent sympathy. The prophet's vocalizations rang out in time with a throb of madness, though its words clotted like gore and tumbled into one another until all sense was lost. The meaning behind them was inescapable. Azagorad's shard would wait no longer. Subtlety and cunning were of no further use. Instead, Amantar would lead an overwhelming force against the human's fastness. It would not stop its attack until the shard was released from its vault, and every organic lifeform capable of resisting lay dead amidst Azagorad's enveloping shadow. Contingencies. Those who belonged to the Oblivion Court were used to their prophet's ways. One did not argue with Amantar's pronouncements or try to resist its commands, at least not without inviting dire consequences. Indeed, the more destroyer-modified of its champions, such as Scorpec Lord Nesfetra the Flayer, or the cryptech known as the Hollow One, vibrated with murderlust at its fanatical call to arms. There were those who retained the self-possession and sanity to mitigate their master's worst excesses, though they acted at that moment without Amantar's consent. There was nothing clandestine about the commands they issued. Rather, they knew this was what the Necrosaur expected of them. Once it had given itself over fully to the madness, it relied upon them to provide the solid strategic foundation upon which its headlong onslaught would build. Even as the majority of Amantar's hosts followed their prophet into a shadowed tectonic chasm, that would allow them to approach First Brand undetected, Nemesaur Anhotek employed her personal command protocols to pair off phalanxes of infantry and war machines from the mass. These she dispatched by other routes to bolster secondary offensives and the defenses of the remote tomb nodes to the north and east of the main complex. They were reinforced by fresh waves of the Cursed Legion as they spilled through the gates from Magnor. If the humans only knew the sheer scale of the horde that still waited to pass through those gates and follow their prophet to war, she believed they would all take their own lives in despair. A little wistful at the thought of how much more efficient such a self-culling would be, the Nemesaur remained within the tomb's depths and bent her will to orchestrating the wider planetary battle. Almost as an afterthought, she detailed several cryptex to sequester the humans' crude Contra-Imperium warhead in an oubliette under guard. So primitive a device held little interest to the Necrons, yet Anhotek was not in the habit of wasting any tool that could be employed in the cause of mass murder. Site Obscurum. As the Necrosaur was leading its legions east through shadow depths, the Thunderhawks of Strikeforce Titus lifted off from Obstinus Bastion. Their initial target was Site Obscurum and the promise of a subterranean route into the heart of Site Umbra. The Ultramarines' oath was for victory or death, and their greatest weapon was the terrible singular will of the captain who led them. Mindful of prowling interceptor craft and the guns of roving canoptic war engines, the Thunderhawks' pilots flew high, preferring to risk the violence of the omnipresent storms. Any view of the surface was occluded as they sped towards Site Obscurum. Still, the furore across the fractured vox channels and the static-laced orbital auger cartographs told their own story. Battery Delta 04 was on its knees despite the best efforts of Legatus Miniverse, who was now in the process of orchestrating an air evacuation of all viable forces before the invaders overran the complex. The last defenders of Munitorum Hub 242 had triggered Generatorum overloads to do as much damage as possible to the tomb extrusions rising through their foundations. Fortis Bastion had been toppled, Imperial forces having no answer to the cowled, scythe-wielding fiend leading the attack. Surviving auxilia and militia had fallen back into the burning Tenacitous sprawl, and now fought street by street against the invaders. Without Ultramarine support to steady the line, they could not halt the foe's momentum. Even First Brand sprawl was suffering now that the Space Marines had departed on their desperate mission, and Titus angrily observed that Archmagos Oct had declined to send any of his clades to support the defenders. The tech priest had concentrated all his forces around the Forge Shrine and appeared concerned only with its defense. More such reports filtered in from all across Nova Magnor, of Necrons intensifying their assaults, of gross cowardice and courageous determination, of a world whose defenders would not concede defeat, and yet looked set to suffer it nonetheless. Titus knew there was only one way to change the practical. The rest of Nova Magnor's defenders just had to hold out long enough for him to achieve it. Thunderbolt. Clearing the northern outskirts of Steel Heights sprawl, the Thunderhawks swept in towards Site Obscurum. Within their troop bays, alert hymnals rang from vox emitters amidst the strobe of crimson lumens. Auspexes chimed warnings of hostile contact ahead. Restraint harnesses creaked as the Ultramarines' gunships banked and rolled to evade anti-aircraft fire before plunging into steep dives. Captain Titus kept his eyes on the vidcapture spooling across his autosenses that showed the crypt complex racing up to meet them, android soldiers swarming like worker insects down its ziggurat slopes. To his right, Gabriel hefted the second company's banner with a fierce grin. To his left, Mataras locked his helm in place, blade drawn. A final flurry of defensive fire, a violent lurch as the formation of Thunderhawks levelled out mere yards above the ground and decelerated hard. Then the assault ramps yawned, and the Ultramarines' restraints unlocked. The warriors of the second company were moving before one heartbeat had passed, and accelerated into a charge within 2. Titus sprang from his gunship's ramp and pounded into the shadow of the looming structures, his battle brothers hard on his heels. Viridium beams chewed through armor and flesh as the androids raked Titus's force with fire. Yet the Necrons were ill-organized, their volleys uncoordinated as they hastened to meet the Space Marines. Having disgorged their warriors, as well as Redemptor brother Polyadrus and Brutalis brother Iapeton, the Thunderhawks rose skyward to lend covering fire. One rocked as blasts from pylons raked its hull and tore off its port thruster. It spiraled away into the outskirts of Steel Heights. The others kept firing, knocking out the Tomb Complex's weapons. Meanwhile, the Ultramarines' charge hit home. Chain blades roaring, power swords crackling, they broke the disordered Necron battle line like a bone across an armored knee. Space Marines fell wounded by gorse fire or impaled on the blades of Scorpic destroyers. Brother Polyadrus staggered as a Canoptic Doomstalker punched blinding fire through its armored hull, then blasted the construct from its feet with a hail of shots. The Necrons fought with uncharacteristic aggression, but could not halt the Ultramarines. Scattering their enemies, Titus's force secured a breach and pushed down into the darkness of Site Obscurum. This complex was less grandiose than Site Umbra. Its halls and chambers were cramped with alien machinery and showed signs of neglect. Despite its apparent secondary importance, however, enemies surged up from its depths in great numbers. Flayed ones squirmed from cracks in ruined walls. Ophidian destroyers erupted from beneath the invaders' feet, while Canoptic wraiths phased like ghosts through solid matter to attack from unexpected angles. Warriors packed corridors, while deformed cryptex goaded them on, and horribly altered royal wardens led their charge. The Ultramarines met this onslaught with disciplined, codex-adherent tactics. Shield walls absorbed the ferocity of the assaults long enough for grenades to be tossed into the androids' tightly packed mass. Feigned retreats drew packs of destroyers into prepared killing zones. Titus, Gabriel, and Metaris all led countercharges to hurl back breakthroughs, fighting with a focused economy of violence. Titus's helm chrono showed 28 minutes of relentless fighting had elapsed when his vanguard broke into a cavernous space that, according to augury, was the Ultramarines' first objective. Sure enough, a sigil-carved arch the height of a warhound titan dominated one obsidian wall. The entrance to the subterranean gallery that led them into the underbelly of Site Umbra. The glow of ocular lenses and weapons lit the space as fresh waves advanced to meet Titus' strike force. With the merest pause to reload their weapons, the Ultramarines charged. Doom or deliverance? Archmagos Oct had ruined more than a score of servitor units attempting to commune with or pry open the artifact. Confounded, he had offered fervent binaric prayers to the Omnissiah, then resorted to attempting direct communion with the device's alien machine spirit. He had received nothing for his troubles, but scorched neural pathways and what felt like some kind of cogitational data infection after triggering a defensive subroutine so esoteric it had resembled a techno-sorcerer's curse. All the while, his Skitarii Marshal provided reports on the worsening state of the war and the Necron phalanxes drawing closer to the streets of Firstbrand. His mind wounded and raw, Oct felt a dreadful sense of opportunity slipping through his grasp. Then came the omnispectral readings from the forged Shrine's Augurium. They revealed a massive alien host approaching the sprawl by means of a tectonic fissure that, it seemed, hid their approach from more conventional Imperial augurs. His subordinates requested approval to share their warning with the rest of Firstbrand's defenders. Oct found himself unwilling, or perhaps unable, to give it. Were these his own thoughts and impulses, he wondered in mounting alarm, or something alien introduced by the curse? Or, the thought struck him with the force of holy revelation, was it the will of the Omnissiah making itself known? What if his role was not to open this alien prison himself, but instead to deliver it unto one who could, as an agent of the true faith? There was a certain elegant symmetry in an angel of the Omnissiah being released by the same misguided Xenos that had imprisoned it. Odd sense, perhaps, a test of his faith in being forced to surrender his will in this way. He hoped, prayed, that this was true, as he lingered enthralled to the Necron device, and his maniples waited, deaf to the desperate pleas of the Sprawl's defenders, who were waiting for orders Oct was no longer equipped to give. Death Knell. Necrosaur Ammentar's legion burst from the tectonic fissures in an upwelling tide of living metal, surging up rubble slopes, scaling rock faces with their bladed limbs, or simply thrusting upwards on cushions of anti-grav propulsion. They poured into the outskirts of First Brand, their prophet leading the charge. Nothing could stand before them and live. The first victims were a scratch company of Nova Magorian militia. Having driven off a raiding pack of Lockhurst destroyers and tomb blades, the ragged human soldiers had started fortifying a string of damaged habdomes that looked out onto the iron wilds. One moment they toiled with spools of ripwire and flakboard screens. The next, their lookouts screamed warnings of an unstoppable horde bearing down upon them. To his credit, the Nova Magorian's commanding officer did not panic. Yet he had barely begun to broadcast his warning to Obstinous Command when the wickering blade fingers of a flayed one slid about his throat. Anarchy followed his death. A handful of the bravest, almost zealous militia held their ground and fired into the onrushing multitude, while their fellows turned and fled. With Lockhursts and Canoptic Scarabs darkening the skies above them, and Hexmark's destroyers bursting from dimensional oubliettes on every side, they did not get far. The militia's commander's report was just the first voice in a rising clamour of hysteria and despair. Frustration built within Obstinous Bastion's stratagem as Governor Gallo and her officers attempted to respond to the situation. How could so enormous an enemy force have appeared so suddenly on their very doorstep? What strategies could possibly be employed to meet such a murderous horde? Fragments of contradictory orders, requests, and terrified prayers choked the command vox channels, exacerbating an already nightmarish scenario. Appeals to the Adeptus Mechanicus garrison within the Forged Temple appeared to fall on deaf ears. Attempts to call down orbital fire from Titus's warships were plagued with atmospheric interference. Navis Imperialis and Adeptus Astartes aircraft scrambled for ground attack missions, yet with so many squadrons already committed to far-flung battlefronts elsewhere on Nova Magnor, their efforts were pinpricks against the hide of a rampaging beast. Massacre. The tide of living metal, flashing blades, and arcing energies poured down the streets of First Brand Sprawl. Monstrous android forms crashed through glacic windows, overrun barricades, and brought entire habstacks thundering down in rubble and ruin. Destroyers of every pattern ran rampant. They performed optimized encircling maneuvers to cut off human defenders pinned down by waves of warriors and Canoptic killers. They poured into gaps blasted in battle lines by annihilation barges and monoliths. Where the defenders stood and fought, they were swiftly overrun. Every last soldier butchered with cold savagery, every last tank and artillery piece blasted to atoms or overturned and torn apart. Ammentar coiled and leapt, hacked and blasted, exalted in death at the forefront of the assault. A Lehman Russ Punisher in the colours of the Talassar 18th Auxilia sought to rake the Necrosaur with fire as its cursed legions stormed from the collapsing shrine of St. Osric. For their efforts, the crew were ripped from the peeled open hull of their tank, dying one after the other beneath Ammentar's blades. A bellowing commissar attempting to rally defenders beneath the governor's statue on Plenitude Plaza was blasted to atoms by the Necrosaur. It went on to dismember the Ogrian bodyguards with swift and efficient savagery, while its followers slaughtered scattering soldiers. When, in mounting despair, Governor Gallo sent her personal bodyguard out supported by a single precious Baneblade, they succeeded in stalling the enemy vanguard and retaking the battered fortifications around the Arch of Imperial Magnificence. Amentar ended their resistance. It scaled the Cyclopean Arch while waves of lesser constructs kept the humans occupied, then dropped, like some huge metal arachnid, into the midst of the gubernatorial guard. Blood jetted across screaming faces, and bodies burst into clouds of glowing green particles as Amentar tore its way through the heart of the enemy formation. Unable to fire on the monster killing their comrades for fear of hitting their own, the Baneblade crew were distracted enough by the unfolding disaster that Skorpek Lord Nesvetra was able to close with the war engine. He sprang onto the tank's hull and carved his way inside. The resultant bloodshed spelled the end of the fight for the Arch of Imperial Magnificence and the collapse of Obstinus Bastion's outer fortifications. As the governor took up her blade and prepared to lead the final stand, Amentar turned aside. Sweeping around to the north of the bastion, it instead led its legions in a ferocious assault upon the forge shrine of the Divine Cog. Stranger still, the Skitarii Maniples and Servitor Clades garrisoning the mighty structure responded with seeming confusion and lethargy. Individual formations fought back as the Necrons came at them, and some of the shrine's turrets and voltaic fanes let fly into the attacking aliens. Others sat quiescent, even as they were overrun. It was as though the Martian forces were paralyzed by indecision, unwilling or unable to muster a coherent defense as the Necrosaur's legion methodically dismembered them. Under sustained fire from a trio of doomsday arcs, the forge shrine's colossal doors were reduced to ruin. A defiant countercharge by ragtag conclave of electro-priests and Skitarii met the first onrushing wave of destroyers and, for a handful of minutes, held them at bay. Yet none could halt the Necrosaur's onslaught for long. It punched its blade tail through the reinforced skull of Archmagos' Oct Skitarii Marshal, who had overcome conflicting code impulses to lead the defenses in hopes of protecting his master. With the Marshal's noospheric guidance gone, the last vestiges of Martian resistance collapsed. The Necrons poured into the forge shrine in their hundreds. Only when Amentar smashed down the doors to the inner sanctum did the androids pause their relentless murder spree. Stalking into the vaulted chamber behind their prophet, the Necrosaur's hosts halted, silent, arrayed in serried ranks. Every ocular lens was fixed upon the tesseract vault at the chamber's center, and the lone figure knelt in supplication beside it. Caught between religious ecstasy and loathing, Archmagos Oct murmured binaric prayers while the Necrosaur approached. As it reared over him, Oct raised arms and mechadendrites in desperate supplication. He begged the alien monster to work the will of the Omnissiah, and offered whatever aid he could in the unshackling of the machine god's fettered angel. With surprising gentleness, Amentar unfolded one of Oct's thin shoulders in the massive fingers of its Unmaker gauntlet. Then, with a single vicious motion, it flung the Archmagos into the midst of its followers. Oct's shrill, static-laced screams did not last long. He would not live to see the Hyper-Ankh Conclave unlock the complex mechanisms of their Tesseract Vault, or witness the dread spectre of the Nightbringer Shard rising like a spectre of death from its broken prison. Yet, as a Necrosaur, the Catan Shard and the Cursed Legion commenced their final murderous assault upon Obstinus Bastion. The Novomagoran defenders saw all too well what Archmagos Oct had wrought. Indeed, the fruits of his calamitous error would be amongst the last sights they ever saw. Tombstrike. While the defenders of First Brand fought and died, deep under the ground, Captain Titus's forces waged their own war. Mile by bloody mile, they smashed a path through their enemies. Not once did the Ultramarines falter, no matter their casualties, no matter the dwindling of their ammunition supplies, and the seemingly inexhaustible numbers of their foes. Ancient Gabriel bellowed curses at the alien androids, banner held high amidst the strobe light of muzzle flare and arcing energies. Sergeant Metaris cut and thrust, smashed with his shield, and bludgeoned with his power sword's pommel, and no matter how they strove, no Necron could lay talon or blade upon him. The Ultramarines' exemplary battlecraft would have made Roboute Guilliman proud, had the Primarch borne witness to it this day. Yet it was Captain Titus, above all, who truly fought like a champion of Ultramar in that savage subterranean conflict. Titus emptied bolts into android bodies until the barrel of his pistol glowed from use. He hacked, stabbed, and cut with his chainsword until broken chain teeth scattered in his wake, and still he fought on with the weapon snarling and stuttering in his fist. Titus smashed his foes aside with a grim relentlessness that even the destroyers could not match. His battle brothers advanced unstoppable in his wake. The captain of the second knew all too well that loyal servants of the Emperor were fighting and dying with every moment his mission remained incomplete. He believed, too, that if his first strike had succeeded in their attack against Site Umbra, the war on Nova Magnor would not have escalated to its current murderous heights. Titus would not fail again. He would do his duty no matter the cost. He channeled every iota of his determination and self-recrimination into the fight, and the Necrons fell before him in sparking ruin. At last, battered, bloodied, and with far fewer battle brothers than they had begun their operation, Strikeforce Titus smashed aside a final phalanx of corrupted warriors. They emerged from the underground gallery into the corridors of Site Umbra. Now the Tech Marines came to the fore. Communing with the machine spirits of their auspexes, they triangulated the energy signature of the Vortex bomb and led their battle brothers towards the prize. For a time, deep in the bowels of Site Umbra, the Ultramarines went unchallenged. They could not know it, though they suspected, but the Necrosaur's ceaseless urging had now gripped even the most rational of its followers, and seen them ascend to join the surface war. Phalanxes and construct swarms that would usually have patrolled the tomb's depths had instead abandoned their posts, compelled by the Necrosaur's insidious command protocols. Only Necrosaur Anhutek resisted her prophet's call, though its parasitic madness dragged at her cortex. She remained within the pillar chamber at the tomb's heart, continuing to direct the distribution of incoming reinforcements from Magnor for as long as her willpower held out. So great was the mental strain on Anhutek that she did not register the Ultramarines' approach until they were virtually on top of her position. Yet, as Titus's surviving warriors closed in on their destination, they were forced to confront phalanxes on their way up to the surface. The moment the clash began, the danger registered in Necrosaur Anhutek's awareness, along with a stab of genuine amazement that any foe so primitive could have launched such an audacious assault. It did not take a strategic genius to guess that the Imperial elites had returned to finish what they had started with their crude, but she had to admit, likely effective bomb. Anhutek wasted no time chiding herself for hubris. Instead, she focused on mustering what forces she could, piercing the song of madness echoing through her synthetic minds long enough to interdict the transhuman force. Victory or death. The entrance to the oubliette into which the vortex bomb had been cast was located several hundred yards from the pillar chamber, amidst a tangle of claustrophobic corridors. Titus and his warriors reached it before Anhutek and her ad hoc phalanx. The Tech Marines set to work at once, burning through the oubliette's quantum deadlocks, while their comrades encircled them in a wall of ceramite and shared out the last of their ammunition. When the Necrosaur's attack came, Titus and his battle brothers met it with a hail of bolt shots, plasma blasts, and melter beams. Android warriors shuddered and exploded amidst the firestorm. Some rose again to keep fighting, while others shimmered away like banished ghosts. The Ultramarines could not maintain their fire for long, however. Soon, the last of their ammunition reserves was spent, and they were down to fighting with fists and blades. Leaving Mataras, Redemptor brother Polyardrus, and a handful of warriors to defend the Tech Marines, Titus, Gabriel, and Brutalis brother Iapton led the charge. The fight was savage. Iapton ploughed through Necrons like a battering ram. He picked up squirming destroyers in his huge fists, crushing them or smashing them into the tunnel walls, until the thunderous whipcrack of Anhutek's tachyon arrow rang out. Iapeton toppled with a hideous rent blast clean through his sarcophagus. The last valiant Terminators to fight at Titus's side were dragged down, their mighty armor ripped open bit by bit, until their hearts could be pierced or their entrails torn out. Ancient Gabriel fell, badly wounded by the slice of a Scorpeg's blade, only for Titus to strike down his battle brother's assailant before it could land the killing blow. Roaring his chapter's war cry, Titus vaulted the discorporating android and smashed his blade into the energy-wreathed war scythe of Necrosaur Anhutek. The two leaders fought a swift and furious duel, evenly matched in strength and skill. Back and forth through the press of battle they warred, battering each other's guards, seeking any opening to exploit. Titus had been fighting for hours without respite, was wounded and, even by Adeptus Astartes standards, nearing the point of exhaustion. Yet his will and his duty propelled him onwards. Anhutek had no weakness of the flesh to plague her, and was goaded to ever greater ferocity by the murder madness of her prophet. Yet that same insanity gnawed at her focus and discipline, leaving her impatient for the kill, desperate to exterminate the organic contaminants despoiling this sterile Necron fastness. It was that murder lust that caused Anhutek to overextend in a wild, decapitating sweep. Weaving aside from the blow, Titus drove his snarling chainsword up through the Necrosaur's torso to burst, smoking and churning, from between her shoulders. Stricken, the Necrosaur slumped, her body glowing with witchlight, and becoming ghostly before phasing away to her far-distant reanimation sarcophagus. Titus looked about to find the battle was done, and that the Tech Marines had overcome the strange energy labyrinth within which the Vortex Bomb and its grav buyer had been enmeshed. Even now they were guiding the hovering conveyance out into the corridor, with its ominous payload squatting malevolently atop it. Wounded and bloodied, with their ranks painfully thin, the survivors of Strike Force Titus bore the bomb towards its goal. They set it in its designated deployment site, directly beneath the pillar chamber, then stood guard over it while the Tech Marines completed their ministrations. Only once the countdown chrono was running, and could not be stopped, did Titus give the order for his surviving battle brothers to exfiltrate to the surface. It was time to be gone, before Site Umbra and everything within it was annihilated. Aftermath. Both warring factions on Nova Magnor had struck the mightiest blows they could. Both strikes had landed true, and in the wake of them, everything was changed. Titus's Tech Marines had set a short countdown on the Vortex Bomb to minimize the danger of alien interference. Burdened by the wounded and forced to circumnavigate foes, they no longer had the strength to fight. Strike Force Titus barely reached the upper levels of the tomb before titanic energy spikes on their auto-senses told them the bomb had triggered. Far below, the vortex started expanding, consuming all in its path. Forcing themselves into a last burst of speed, the Ultramarines reached the surface and found an exit from the maze. Still running to clear the projected blast zone, Titus called in his strike force's surviving gunships. They streaked down as tendrils of empiric energy erupted from the slopes of the tomb's complex, which started collapsing into an expanding sphere of lightning-edged darkness. Arcs of anti-aircraft fire lashed out from the tomb's pylons, scoring glancing hits upon the Thunderhawks before the vortex devoured the Xenos weapons. The Ultramarines' gunships were still landing when the last survivors of Strike Force Titus threw themselves aboard. One pilot dared the very fringes of the maelstrom to give lumbering Redemptor brother Polyadras and the worst wounded a chance to escape. The Thunderhawks then powered back into the skies. Behind them, like some dark and malevolent star, the warp vortex devoured Site Umbra in a storm of annihilated matter before collapsing in upon itself. In the blast's wake, nothing remained of the tomb complex beyond a spheroid crater 5 miles in diameter, in whose depths strange witchlights flickered and died. A world to win. shrugging off exhaustion that would have killed an unaugmented warrior, Captain Titus reviewed local strategic developments while his gunships fell into a holding pattern, pilots awaiting his orders. First Brand had fallen beneath the talons of the Necron's monstrous leader, along with the obstinate Bastion and Forge Shrine. Battery Delta 04, a much of steel-hide sprawl, had been similarly overrun, while the last defenders of Tanatinous Sprawl were in full retreat. Governor Gallo was dead, as were most of the planet's senior command. Titus had known the price for victory would be high. Still, he was dismayed at the butcher's bill. There was cause for hope, however. At Munitorum Hub 242 and Battery Halo 09, the Necrons had been hurled back. Meanwhile, Legatus Minervus had successfully evacuated considerable Ultramarine and Novamagorian forces from Battery Delta 04 before establishing a rallying point for surviving Imperial forces at the crossroads of the duty highways. In a brief Vox conclave, the Legatus assured Titus that she had already amassed a substantial army of retreating and reconstituted forces from across the region and stood ready to lead them against whatever target was deemed primary. Better still, the Vortex bomb had annihilated the tomb complex and, it became clear after a few hours had passed, seemingly choked off the flow of alien reinforcements almost entirely. Imperial battle lines across the planet that had been on the verge of collapse now steadied, as the number of enemies joining the fight lessened sharply. Moreover, the Necrons appeared to have lost some of their murderous aggression. At first, this was attributed to the destruction of some influence within Site Umbra, yet, as further reports filtered in and hours became a local day cycle, then too, it appeared the Necron's leader had vanished. No sign of the entity, nor the scythe-wielding Reaper creatures that had fought at the forefront of its legions, was seen anywhere on Nova Magnor. Time would tell whether it had truly abandoned the fight and, if so, how it had managed to find its way off-world. It was enough for now that, with it seemingly gone, the Necron's attack slackened off. With 4th Company reinforcements now mere days' cycle away, Titus's remaining Ultramarines resupplied and got back in the fight, and Imperial forces on the advance in many locations, it appeared Nova Magnor would survive to join the 500 worlds. Yet for all this, even as he did his duty as Master of the Watch and fought to purge the remaining Xenos menace, Titus wondered. What had the device been, found opened and dead in the ruins of the Forge Shrine? What was the true nature of the Destroyer Fiend that had led the fighting here? And if it had left, where then had it gone? He had yet to truly get the answers he desired about the causes and objectives of this war. Yet, if he could, if duty allowed, then Titus would fulfill his vow to find the monster again and end its menace once and for all. Grim Crusade. With another shard of its guards secured, Amentar departed Ushimekum. The Necrosaurs was a crusade on the grandest scale. It might wish to lose itself forever in the cold perfection of slaughter, yet as lucidity returned after Obstinus Bastion's fall, so too did perspective. Amentar needed to murder all organic life everywhere in the galaxy. Only a god of death could bestow such a gift. Any lesser being, even undying Necrons, might as well attempt to drain an ocean with a thimble, as eradicate every last trace of the biological contaminants that profaned the stars. Alone amongst destroyers, the Necrosaur recognized this and retained the vision and reason to act upon the knowledge. Thus, leaving a portion of its forces to continue the eradication upon Ushimekum, Amentar departed via a lesser transspatial nexus within a deep-buried 2 annex near the planet's southern pole. With it went the shards of its guard, the morbid nobles of its Oblivion court, and enough destroyers and co-opted soldiery to see its will done. Azagorod's whispers permeated Amentar's cortex and drew it ever onward. So the horror began again on another world. Repeating, Vox Hail Urgent Signature, Primus. Clearance Grade, Vermilion. 235, approved. Intended Recipient, Primarch Roboute Guilliman, Ultramarines. Lord Commander Imperium, Lord Regent. Clearance Signifier Ident, Lion L. Johnson, Primarch. Dark Angels. Vox Missive Content. Brother, we need to talk. Exload concludes. I have been Baldmort, your faithful servant. Hit the video description for Patreon or affiliate links. Now, no matter what you do today, do try to make some time for fun. Toodaloo. See you next week.